Welcome back to the quiet apothecary. Take a slow breath, settle into where you are, and let the shoulders soften a little. There is no hurry tonight, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Tonight we travel to a town on the southern coast of Italy, where the first great school of medicine in Europe once stood, a small bright town between the green mountains and the warm sea, where for many hundreds of years the learned men and women of half the known world came to learn the slow, careful art of healing. The town is called Salerno, and it stands upon a wide blue bay on the western coast of the southern part of Italy, a little below the great city of Naples, where the mountains come down almost to the water, and the lemon trees grow upon the steep terraces above the shore. Imagine, for a moment, the close of a warm evening in that town. Somewhere in the long stretch of years we now call the High Middle Ages, when the school was at the height of its fame, in the 11th or the 12th century after Christ, when the cathedral was new, and the harbour was full of the small dark ships of the trading sea. The light is going golden, and then rose upon the water. The sun is sinking behind the headland, and the sea is turning from blue to a deep and quiet violet, and the small waves are folding over upon the shingle below the town with a soft and endless sound. The swifts are wheeling and crying high in the warm air above the red rooftops, and somewhere among the narrow climbing lanes of the town, a bell is ringing for the evening prayer, slow and deep and far away. High on the hillside above the harbour, in a tall, narrow house of pale stone, with a small balcony that looks out over the rooftops to the darkening sea, there is a room that we shall make our own tonight. It is the dispensary of an old master of the school, a physician grown grey in the long study of his art. And it is the place where he keeps his medicines and writes his recipes and receives, in the cool of the evening, the few who come to him still for healing. The shutters of the small window stand open to the sea breeze, and the warm air comes in off the water smelling of salt and of lemon blossom and of the dried herbs that hang in their bunches from the dark beams of the low ceiling. A single oil lamp burns upon the broad table, a small clay lamp with a floating wick, and its soft yellow light falls upon the rows of jars and pots that stand along the shelves of dark wood, the green glazed earthenware and the clear glass, and the plain turned boxes of olive wood, each one labelled in a fine brown ink upon a small strip of parchment, in the careful Latin and the careful Arabic of the learned healing of the South. The old master sits at his table in the lamplight, a spare and quiet man in a long dark gown, with a face much lined by thought, and by the long looking into the eyes of the sick, and very still and careful hands that have weighed out the precious powders of his trade 10,000 times and more. Before him on the table lie his tools, the small bright balance with its little brass weights, the marble mortar worn smooth and pale with the grinding of a lifetime, the bone spatula, the small horn spoons, and a great open book bound in plain calf leather, in which, page by careful page, he has written down the recipes of his school and his long life, the receipts of the masters who taught him and of the masters who taught them, reaching back in an unbroken chain of careful copying and patient remembering to the very founding of the school, and beyond it, across the sea, to the ancient physicians of Greece and of Arabia and of Rome. That is where I would like to begin tonight, there, in that high quiet room above the darkening harbour, with the lamp burning soft and golden upon the table, and the dried herbs hanging from the dark beams, and the warm sea breeze coming in at the open window, and the old master sitting still and patient over his great book of recipes, ready, in his slow and careful way, to share with us the gathered wisdom of the famous school of Salerno. For Salerno was something quite new in the world, in an age when most healing was still the work of the village wise woman and the monk in his cloister. Salerno was the first true school of medicine in all of Europe, the place where the art of healing was studied openly and taught and written down and handed on by master to pupil in a great living tradition. It grew up slowly, over many quiet centuries, in this one small fortunate town upon the warm southern sea. And by the time of our story it had become so famous that men called it the Civitas Hippocratica, the city of Hippocrates, after the great physician of ancient Greece, as though the spirit of the oldest medicine of the world had come at last to rest in this one bright town, between the mountains and the sea. Kings and princes came to Salerno to be healed. The wounded crusaders, returning from the long wars in the east, came to Salerno to have their hurts dressed and their fevers cooled. And young men, and a few women too, came from all over Europe to study there, and went home again with the learning of the south to be the physicians of the cold far north. What made Salerno so rich in healing was that it stood at the meeting place of three great streams of knowledge, three rivers of old medicine that flowed together at last in this one warm southern town. There was the old learning of Greece and Rome, the medicine of Hippocrates and of Galen, kept alive in the Latin of the Western Church. There was the great and subtle learning of the Arabs, the medicine of the physicians of Baghdad and of Cairo and of Muslim Spain, who had taken up the old Greek knowledge and studied it, and added to it greatly over many centuries. And there was, woven through it all, the homely practical healing of the southern Italian country itself, the herbs of the hillside and the receipts of the good wives, the slow folk wisdom of a warm and fruitful land. And at Salerno these three streams met and mingled, the Greek and the Arab and the Italian, and out of their meeting came a medicine richer and wiser than any one of them alone. And it is from that rich meeting that the 100 recipes of tonight are drawn. Before we turn to the first of them, let us say a quiet word about how they have come down to us, these old Salernitan recipes, that you may know they are true things and not mere fancies. Some of them come from a famous old book of the school, a long poem of health written in flowing Latin verse that we call the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, the Rule of Health of Salerno. It was loved and copied all across Europe for hundreds of years, and men called it also the Flos Medicinae, the flower of medicine, and the Lilium Medicinae, the lily of medicine, and it was so easy and so pleasant to remember, set as it was to rhyme, that scholars learned it by heart and carried its gentle advice in their heads all their lives. Some of the recipes come from the writings of the women of Salerno, and chiefly from a group of texts on the medicine of women that we call the Trotula, named for a famous woman healer of the town, Trot of Salerno, who was one of the very few women of the whole Middle Ages whose medical writings have come down to us under her own name. And some come from the great work of a strange and learned man named Constantine the African, who came to Salerno from across the sea in the 11th century, and who translated the medical books of the Arabs out of their Arabic into the Latin of the West, and so opened the whole vast treasury of Eastern healing to the physicians of Europe. From these three sources above all, the verse rule of health, the receipts of the women, and the translations of the African, the 100 recipes of tonight are gathered. A short and gentle word, before we begin, about what was true in all this and what was not, for I would not have you trust the old medicine more than it deserves. The masters of Salerno, like all the healers of their age, believed in the 4 humours of the body, the blood and the phlegm, and the yellow bile and the black, and they chose their herbs by whether they were reckoned hot or cold, wet or dry, and a great deal of this old theory was simply mistaken. Some of their recipes were useless, and a few were dangerous, and now and then they reached for the charm and the costly jewel where a plain herb would have served as well or better. And yet they were, for their age, wonderfully careful and wonderfully wise. They washed their wounds clean with wine when half of Europe was binding wounds with filth. They knew the poppy for sleep and the willow, and the meadow sweet for fever and the foxglove, used most carefully for the failing heart, long before the modern science of medicine came along behind them to say why these things worked. So we will not laugh at them tonight, and we will not scold them. We will simply sit with the old master in his lamplit room above the sea, and listen to his 100 recipes one at a time, the wise with the hopeful, and the true with the merely tried, and let them drift past us softly in the warm dark, like the slow folding of the waves upon the shingle below. That is the pace I would like to keep tonight. Slow, even, steady as the small waves breaking softly on the shore below the town. There will be 100 recipes, told one at a time, each in its quiet turn, and we will walk through them by their use, beginning with the gentle remedies for the stomach and the slow work of digestion, and going on from there through the recipes for the fevers and the agues, the salves and the waters for wounds, the gentle receipts for sleep and for a quiet mind, the famous remedies of the women of Salerno, the recipes for the eyes and the aching tooth, the liniments and the baths for the stiffened joints, and at the very last the cordials for the heart and for the failing spirits. You do not need to remember a single one of them. There will be no quiz at the end, and nothing here that asks anything of you. Let them drift past like the soft smoke of the lamp, and let the body grow quiet at its own slow pace. And if your eyes should close somewhere among the first dozen, that is exactly as it should be. The 100 recipes will go on softly, whether you are listening or no. The old master turns the first page of his great book now, and smooths it flat with his careful hand, and the lamp flickers a little in the sea breeze, and then steadies, and far below the window the waves go on folding softly over upon the darkening shore. Let us begin, as the masters of Salerno so often began, with the stomach, for they held that the health of the whole body began in the good digestion of the food, and that a great many of the ills of the flesh had their first root in a stomach that did its work badly. Let us turn now to the gentle recipes for the stomach and for the slow work of digestion. The first recipe is one of the oldest and the simplest of all, and the master would have you know it before any other, for it is the great gentle cleanser of the stomach, and it is called oxymel. The name is an old Greek word, and it means simply acid and honey, for that is all it is, the sourness of vinegar and the sweetness of honey boiled together into a clear, thin syrup. To make it, you take good wine vinegar and clear honey, and a little water, and you set them together over a low fire, and let them simmer slowly, and skim away the froth that rises, until they have boiled down to a smooth, bright syrup the color of dark amber. The master kept a tall glazed jar of it always upon his shelf, for it was the foundation of 100 other remedies, the gentle base into which he would stir his bitter herbs and his cooling roots, so that the medicine might go down the more easily upon the honey and the vinegar. Taken alone, a spoonful in a little warm water in the morning, it was held to cut through the thick cold phlegm that gathered in the stomach overnight, to loosen the chest, to sharpen the dull appetite, and to set the whole sluggish body gently going again at the start of the day. There is something very pleasing in its plainness, this oldest of the medicines, only the sour and the sweet of the common kitchen, boiled patiently together over a low fire, and yet trusted by the wisest physicians of the age above 100 costlier things. The master would dip his horn spoon into the amber jar, and let the bright syrup run slowly back, thick and clear in the lamplight, and smile a little, for it was the first medicine he had ever learned to make, and he had never found a better. The second recipe is a sweeter thing, a comfort for the queasy stomach and the dry, tickling chest, and it is called Digestion, though the country people knew it by the simpler name of penides, which are nothing other than the twists of pale, pulled sugar that you may still find in an old-fashioned sweet shop to this very day. To make it, you take the finest white sugar, which in those days came costly and rare from the East, and you boil it slowly with a little barley water and a few sweet almonds and the white of an egg to clear it, until it draws out in a thread between the fingers, and then, while it is still warm and soft, you pull it again and again upon a hook upon the wall, folding and pulling and folding again, until the clear sugar grows pale and white and shining and full of fine air, and then you twist it into little sticks and let it harden. It was given to suck slowly for the cough that comes of a dry, thin rheum, for the rawness of the throat, and for the stomach made queasy by sharp humours, for the sweet smoothness of it was held to coat and to soothe whatever it passed over, the throat and the gullet and the stomach alike. The master kept his penides in a small lidded box of olive wood, wrapped each one in a twist of clean parchment against the damp of the sea air, and he gave them most often to children, and to the very old, and to any whose strength was low, and whose stomach would bear nothing heavier. And there is a great gentleness in the thought of it, that the medicine for the weakest and the youngest and the most fragile should be, of all the medicines in the cupboard, simply a small sweet twist of shining sugar. The third recipe is a clear sweet water for the colic and the wind, made from the seed of the fennel, that tall feathery herb with the warm aniseed scent that grows along every southern roadside. To make it, you take a good spoonful of the dried fennel seed and bruise it a little in the mortar to wake the scent of it, and pour upon it a cup of water that has just come to the boil, and cover it close, and let it stand and steep until it is no more than warm, and then strain it clear. It is a warming and a comforting water, and it was given above all for the griping wind that knots the belly, for the colic that doubles a grown man over, and that makes the small infant cry through the long night. The master gave it warm, sweetened a little with honey, to ease the clenching of the gut, and to bring the wind away, and he gave it most of all to the nursing mother for her fretful colicky child, a few warm spoonfuls upon a horn spoon, exactly as the gentle gripe water of the modern chemist is given to the colicky infant to this very day, and made, even now, of the very same warm, sweet fennel seed. The whole room would fill with the soft aniseed scent of it as the water steeped, a clean and comforting smell, and the crying child would grow quiet upon its mother's breast, and the master would nod slowly and turn back to his book. The fourth recipe is a bitter green electuary for the weak and watery stomach, made of mint and wormwood worked together into a soft paste with honey. An electuary, you should know, was one of the great forms of the old medicine, simply a powder or a pulp of herbs, kneaded together with enough honey or sweet syrup to make a soft, thick paste, like a stiff jam. That could be kept in a pot and taken by the spoonful, the sweetness of the honey carrying down the bitterness of the herb. To make this one, you take dried mint leaves and dried wormwood, the bitter silver herb of the dry hillside, and grind them small in the mortar, and work them up with clear honey into a smooth green paste. The mint is cooling and settling and sweet of scent, and the wormwood is bitter and warming, and was held the great strengthener of a feeble stomach. And the two together, the cool sweet mint and the hot bitter wormwood, were thought to brace and to settle a stomach grown weak and watery and slow, to wake the dull appetite, and to drive out the worms that the old physicians believed bred in a foul and undigested gut. A small spoonful was taken before the meal, and the bitterness of it, even through the honey, would make the mouth water and the stomach stir, which is the very thing a bitter herb does, as the modern science now agrees, waking the slow juices of digestion by its very bitterness upon the tongue. The fifth recipe is a warm, sweet comfit for the stomach after a heavy meal, made of aniseed and ginger candied in sugar. And it was the very pleasantest of all the master's stomach medicines, for it was hardly to be told from a sweetmeat. To make the comfits, you take the seeds of anise and small pieces of the dried root of ginger, and you coat them slowly and patiently in layer upon layer of sugar, rolling them in a warm pan with a little sugar syrup poured over again and again, until each small seed and each small piece of root is grown round and white and smooth, with its many coats of hardened sugar. They were set out upon the table at the close of a great feast, in a little dish of silver or of glass, and the guests would take a few and chew them slowly, for the warm aniseed and the hot sweet ginger were held to settle the stomach after the richness and the weight of the feast, to carry away the wind, to sweeten the breath, and to warm and quicken a digestion grown heavy and slow with too much rich food and strong wine. It is the direct and unbroken ancestor of the little dish of sugared fennel or aniseed that is still set out in the warm countries of the south and the east at the very end of a heavy meal, to be chewed slowly while the talk runs on and the candles burn low. A small, sweet, warm medicine that is half a comfort and half a sweetmeat, exactly as it was in the dining halls of Salerno 800 years ago. The sixth recipe is a warm, spiced wine for the gripes of the cold stomach, made with cumin and caraway, those two warm and pungent seeds of the kitchen that the old physicians held among the best of all the warmers of a cold and griping gut. To make it, you take a cup of good red wine, and into it you put a little bruised cumin seed, and a little bruised caraway, and a small piece of cinnamon bark perhaps, and you warm it gently by the fire, not letting it come to the boil, until the wine has drawn out the warmth and the savour of the seeds, and then you strain it and drink it warm and slow. It was given for the cold gripes that twist the belly in the winter, for the wind that will not move, and for the slow and chilly digestion of the old, whose inward warmth, the physicians believed, grew weak and low as the years drew on, so that they needed the warming spices to kindle again the dying fire of the stomach. The master gave it most often on the cold nights of the winter, when the sea wind blew raw and wet up the narrow lanes of the town, and there is a great homely comfort in the thought of it. The cup of warm spiced wine held in two cold hands, the steam of it rising fragrant with cumin and caraway and cinnamon into the lamplight, the slow warmth of it spreading down through the chilled and griping body like the warmth of a fire newly lit upon a cold hearth. The seventh recipe is a cooling rose electuary for the hot and burning stomach, and the master called it by its old Greek name, diarodon, which means simply the rose medicine, for the rose was the very heart of it. The rose, in the old reckoning, was a cool and dry and gently binding flower, and it was held above almost every other herb for the comfort of a part that burned with too much heat. And so this rose electuary was given for the stomach that was hot and sore and sour. That could keep nothing down. That burned with what we should now perhaps call the heat of a sour and acid gut. To make it, you take dried red rose petals, the deep red damask roses that grew in such plenty in the warm gardens of the south, and you grind them small and work them up with a little white sugar and a few cooling and binding things, a little powdered coral perhaps, or a little of the gum called tragacanth, into a soft rose-colored paste, fragrant with the dried sweetness of the flower. A small spoonful was taken to cool and to settle, and to bind a hot, loose, painful stomach, and the master kept it in a small lidded jar of clear glass, the soft pink of it glowing faintly in the lamplight. And when he opened the jar, the whole room would fill for a moment with the deep sweet ghost of a summer rose garden, and the sick would breathe it in and grow a little calmer even before they had tasted of the medicine, for half the virtue of the rose, the old masters said, lay in its gentle scent alone. The eighth recipe is a sweet conserve of quince, to bind the loose and watery bowel, and the master called it by its Latin name, diacidonium, which means simply the medicine of the quince. The quince is that hard golden fruit, something between an apple and a pear, that grows in the warm southern orchards, and that cannot well be eaten raw, for it is sour and woody and binding upon the tongue, but that becomes, when it is slowly cooked with sugar or honey, one of the most fragrant and delicious of all conserves. And that very binding soreness, that drew the mouth tight when the fruit was raw, was held by the old physicians to bind and to settle a bowel that ran too loose and too free, so that the conserve was at once a sweetmeat for the table and a sound medicine for the flux. To make it, you take ripe quinces, and pare them and core them and cut them small, and stew them long and slow with honey or with sugar, until the hard pale flesh has turned soft and deep and red, a deep ruby red that comes upon the quince in the long cooking, and then you pound it smooth and pot it. A spoonful was given to stay the loose bowel, and to comfort, and to settle the stomach. And it was the very same quince marmalade that the great folk of Salerno set out upon their tables as a delicacy, the medicine and the sweetmeat being, once again, the very same thing, the one fragrant ruby paste serving the feast and the sick room alike. The 9th recipe is a small hard lozenge to suck for the sour belch and the heaviness after eating, made of 2 of the precious gums of the East, galangal and mastic. Galangal is a root, a cousin of the ginger, warm and spicy and aromatic, that came to Salerno along the long trade roads from the Far East, and mastic is the pale fragrant gum that weeps from a small tree that grows, even now, chiefly upon one Greek island in the warm eastern sea, and that has a clean piney resinous taste much loved in the south. To make the lozenge, you grind the galangal small, and you take the little clear tears of the mastic gum, and you work them together with a little sugar and gum into a stiff paste, and roll it thin, and cut it into small round lozenges, and let them dry hard. They were carried in a little box and taken out, and sucked slowly after a heavy meal. For the warm galangal was held to settle, and to comfort the stomach, and to carry away the wind. And the clean mastic was held to sweeten the breath, to strengthen the gums, and to ease the sour and rising heat of a troubled stomach. The chewing of mastic for the sweetening of the breath and the easing of the stomach is older than Salerno and older than Rome, and it goes on to this very day in the warm countries of the East. And the master, sucking his small fragrant lozenge, as he bent over his great book in the lamplight, was keeping a custom already ancient when his school was young. The 10th recipe is a soft, sweet decoction of dried figs and raisins to loosen the bound and costive bowel, and it was the gentlest of all the master's remedies for that complaint, fit for a child or for the most delicate stomach. To make it, you take a good handful of the dried figs and a handful of the sweet raisins, the great soft purple raisins of the southern vine, and you simmer them slowly in water until they are swollen and soft, and have given up their sweetness and their gentle loosening virtue into the water. And then you may either drink the sweet brown water alone, or eat the soft sweet fruit along with it. The figs and the raisins, the old physicians knew well, gently move and soften a bowel grown slow and bound, and they do it kindly, without the griping and the violence of the stronger purges, and so they were given to the very young and the very old, and to the woman with child, and to any whose strength was too low to bear a harsher medicine. There is a deep good sense in it that the modern science wholly agrees with. For the dried fig and the raisin are still among the kindest and the surest of the gentle loosening foods, and the old master, simmering his sweet handful of fruit in the little iron pot over the embers, was reaching, without knowing the why of it, for exactly the right thing. The 11th recipe is a bitter cup of wormwood wine, taken before the meal to wake a failing appetite, and it is one of the oldest tricks in all the long history of healing, the bitter draught before the food. To make it, you take fresh or dried wormwood, the silver bitter herb of the dry hillside, the bitterest, very nearly, of all the herbs of the garden, and you steep it for a while in good wine, and then you strain it clear and drink a small cup of it a little before you sit down to eat. The wine grows green and bitter with the wormwood, almost too bitter to bear, and yet that very bitterness is the whole virtue of it. For a bitter thing upon the tongue, The old masters had learned by long watching, wakes the sleeping appetite and stirs the slow juices of the stomach, so that the food, when it comes, is taken with relish and digested with ease. It was given above all to the sick and the convalescent and the old, in whom the appetite had grown weak and the digestion slow, and to any who had lost all wish for food in a long illness. And it lives on still, this bitter herb wine before the meal, in the bitter aperitif wines of Italy and France that are taken to this very day before dinner to sharpen the appetite, many of them flavored, even now, with the very same bitter wormwood. For the name of one of the most famous of them, Vermouth, is nothing but the old German word for wormwood, worn smooth by the centuries upon the tongue. The 12th recipe is a warm green sauce of sage and pepper, to be eaten with the meat of those whose digestion was cold and weak and slow. For the masters of Salerno held that the right sauce was itself a kind of medicine, chosen to warm or to cool the food, according to the need of the eater. To make it, you take fresh green sage leaves and pound them in the mortar with a little salt and a little ground black pepper and a little bread soaked in vinegar into a thick green pungent sauce, warm and savory and sharp. It was eaten with the roast meat and the boiled fowl, and it served two ends at once, for it gave a fine savour to the meat, and it warmed and quickened a cold and sluggish stomach, helping it to break down the heavy flesh that would otherwise lie undigested and breed wind and soreness within. The sage was held a great warmer and strengthener of the stomach and the brain alike, and the pepper a hot and quickening spice, and the two together in the green sharp sauce were thought to set a slow digestion briskly to its work. It is the ancestor of 100 green herb sauces of the Italian table still, and there is a fine wisdom in it, that the medicine for a weak digestion should be no nasty draught at all, but simply a good sharp sauce, eaten with pleasure alongside the meat. It was meant to help the body to digest. The 13th recipe is a bright red syrup of pomegranate, given for the looseness of the bowel and for the burning thirst of the hot, dry stomach, and it is one of the loveliest of all the old medicines to look upon. The pomegranate is that round red fruit, full of countless small bright seeds, each wrapped in its own cell of jewel red juice, that grows in such plenty in the warm gardens of the south, and its juice is at once sweet and sharp, and very faintly binding upon the tongue. To make the syrup, you take the ripe pomegranates and press out their bright red juice, and boil it slowly with sugar until it has come to a thick and brilliant ruby syrup, clear and shining and deep as a jewel. It was given in a little water, cool for the stomach that ran too loose, for the looseness of a summer flux, and for the dry burning thirst of the fevered. For the gentle soreness of it was held to cool the heat, and the sharpness of it to slake the thirst, and the faint binding of it to stay the flux, all three at once. The master kept it in a tall, slim bottle of clear glass upon his shelf, where the lamplight, falling through it, threw a small pool of glowing red upon the wall, and it was, of all his many syrups, the one the children loved the best, and the one he gave the most gladly, for it was sweet and beautiful, and did no harm, and did, very often, a quiet good. The 14th recipe is a warm, soft fomentation of dill and chamomile, to be laid upon the swollen and aching belly, and with it we shall leave the recipes of the stomach and pass gently on. A fomentation, you should know, was a way of bringing the warmth and the virtue of the herbs to the body from without, by soaking cloths in a hot herb water and laying them upon the part that ailed. To make this one, you take the seed and herb of the dill, and the small golden flowers of the chamomile, those two gentle herbs that smell so sweetly of the warm meadow and the ripe apple, and you steep them in water just off the boil to make a strong, fragrant infusion, and then you dip soft folded cloths into the hot water and wring them out and lay them, as warm as can be borne, upon the swollen and griping belly, and cover them over to keep the warmth, and renew them as they cool. The gentle warmth and the soft scent of the dill and the chamomile were held to relax the knotted and cramping gut, to ease the wind and the colic, and to soothe the swollen and tender belly. And there is no doubt at all that they did so, for the simple warmth of a hot cloth upon a cramping belly is one of the surest and the oldest of all comforts, and the soft, sweet smell of those two quiet herbs, rising warm into the air, would soothe and settle the troubled mind along with the troubled gut. It is a tender thing to picture the old master kneeling by the bed of the sufferer in the lamplight, wringing out the warm, fragrant cloths in his careful hands and laying them gently down. And there could be no kinder way to end our walk among the recipes of the stomach than with that small warm act of comfort in the quiet of the night. Now let us go on, gently, for the night is young yet, and there is much before us still. We have settled the stomach. Let us turn now to the harder country of the fevers and the agues, the burning sicknesses that came so often and took so many in those far-off days, and that the masters of Salerno fought with all the cooling and the loosening arts they knew. Let us turn now to the recipes against the fevers and the agues. The 15th recipe is the very first thing the master would reach for in any fever, the simplest and the most universal of all the old fever medicines, and it is nothing other than barley water, which the old physicians called the tisane, from the Greek word for a drink of barley. To make it, you take a handful of clean barley and wash it well, and set it to simmer slowly in a good deal of water for a long while, an hour or more, until the water has grown faintly white and thick and a little sweet with the soft starch drawn out of the grain. And then you strain it clear and drink it warm or cool, sweetened perhaps with a little honey, or sharpened with a little juice of lemon. It was given freely and constantly to the fevered, by the cupful through the long hot hours of the sickness, and it did, in truth, a great deal of quiet good, for the fevered body burns and dries and thirsts, and the gentle warm barley water cooled it and watered it, and gave it a little soft nourishment besides, at a time when the sick stomach would bear nothing solid. The masters of Salerno gave it for every fever there was, and it was the first medicine taught to every student, and it lives on still, the barley water of the sick room, almost wholly unchanged. The very same handful of barley simmered slow in the very same way, one of the oldest and the gentlest and the wisest of all the medicines that the long art of healing has ever found. The 16th recipe is a cooling syrup of violets, the loveliest of all the fever drinks, and it was held one of the best of all the cool and moist medicines for the hot, dry burning of a fever. The violet, in the old reckoning, was a cool and moist flower, gentle and kindly, and its deep purple sweetness was thought to cool the blood, and to moisten the parched body, and to loosen the bound bowel of the fevered, all by its own soft, cooling nature. To make the syrup, you take a great quantity of the fresh blue violet flowers gathered in the early spring when they are at their sweetest, and you steep them in hot water to draw out their color and their scent into a deep blue infusion. And then you strain it and boil it gently with sugar until it has come to a clear syrup of the most beautiful deep violet blue. It was given in a little water to the fevered, to cool them and to comfort them, and to gently move the bowel. And it was given too to children for their coughs and their hot little fevers, for it was sweet and pretty, and they took it gladly. The master kept it in a tall bottle of clear glass, and it was, of all the medicines upon his shelf, perhaps the most beautiful to the eye. That deep, soft violet blue glowing in the lamplight like a piece of the spring sky bottled and kept against the need of the sick. And when he poured it out into the water, it bloomed and spread in soft blue clouds, and the fevered child would watch it, half asleep, with wondering eyes. The 17th recipe is a sharper and a stronger oxymel, an oxymel of squills made for the thick and laboring chest that so often comes with a fever, when the breath grows short and the cough is hard and dry and brings up nothing. The squill is the great bulb of a kind of sea lily that grows along the warm rocky shores of the southern sea, a powerful and a slightly dangerous plant, sharp and acrid, that the old physicians used, in small and careful measure, to loosen the thick stubborn phlegm of the chest, and to bring up the matter that lay heavy upon the lungs. To make the medicine, you take a little of the dried squill, and you steep it in vinegar to draw out its sharp virtue, and then you take that sharp squill vinegar and boil it up with honey into an oxymel, the same sour and sweet syrup we met at the very first, but armed now with the cutting power of the squill. A spoonful was given in a little warm water for the tight and laboring chest, to thin and to loosen the phlegm, and to ease the hard, dry cough. And the master gave it with a careful hand, in small measure, for the squill is strong, and not to be trifled with, but given rightly it did a true and a noticeable good, loosening a chest that nothing gentler would move. It is among the oldest of all the medicines for the chest. This oxymel of squills, named and praised by the physicians of ancient Greece 1,000 years before Salerno, and used at Salerno still, and not yet wholly forgotten even in the medicine of the recent past. The 18th recipe is a cooling green decoction of endive and lettuce to cool the overheated blood and to quiet the fevered body toward sleep, and it is one of the gentlest of all the cooling medicines. The endive and the wild lettuce were both reckoned cool and moist herbs, the very opposites of the hot, dry humor that the masters believed lay at the root of a fever. And the lettuce had besides a faint and gentle drowsy virtue, a soft milky juice that was held to invite a little sleep, which is no mere fancy, for the wild lettuce does indeed hold in its milky sap a faint sleepy principle that the modern science has confirmed. To make the decoction, you take the leaves of the endive and the wild lettuce, and simmer them gently in water until the water has drawn out their cool green virtue, and then you strain it and give it cool to drink. It was given to cool the burning of the fever from within, to calm and to quiet the restless fevered body, and to coax it, by the soft sleepy nature of the lettuce, a little way toward the healing rest of sleep. For the masters of Salerno knew well, as every good healer knows, that sleep itself is among the greatest of all the medicines, and that to bring a fevered and restless sufferer to sleep is to set their own body free to do its quiet, healing work in the dark. The 19th recipe is a soft dark electuary of tamarind and prunes, given to loosen the body of the fevered, for the old masters held that a fever was helped by the gentle opening of the bowel, which carried away, as they believed, some of the corrupt and burning humor that fed the heat. The tamarind is the long brown pod of a great tree of the hot east, full of a sticky dark pulp that is sharp and sour and gently loosening, and it came to Salerno along the spice roads as one of the prized medicines of the Arab physicians, who valued it greatly for the cooling and loosening of the fevered body. To make the electuary, you take the dark sour pulp of the tamarind and the soft sweet flesh of stewed prunes, and you work them together with a little sugar into a soft dark paste, and a spoonful was given to gently open the bowel of the fevered, kindly and without violence, cooling and loosening at once. It was held especially good in the hot fevers of the summer and in the long slow fevers that came of a foul and overloaded gut. And the soreness of the tamarind was thought to cool the heat, while the gentle pulp of the prune carried the burden away. And the sick took it readily enough, for it was sweet and sour and not unpleasant. And the master gave it freely, for it was among the safest and the kindest of all his ways of loosening a bound and fevered body. The 20th recipe is not a thing to be drunk at all, but a thing to be laid upon the body, and it is the cooling cloth of rose vinegar laid upon the burning brow of the fevered. To make it, you take good wine vinegar, and into it you steep a great quantity of dried red rose petals for many days in a closed jar set in the sun, until the vinegar has drawn out the deep sweetness and the cool binding virtue of the rose, and has turned a soft pink and grown fragrant with the flower. And then you strain it clear and keep it in a stoppered bottle. When the fever burned high, the master would take soft clean cloths and dip them in this cool rose vinegar, a little watered, and wring them out and lay them, cool and fragrant, upon the hot brow and the temples and the wrists of the sufferer, and renew them as they warmed against the burning skin. The coolness of the vinegar drew away the heat, and the gentle sourness of it was held to brace and to refresh, and the soft sweet scent of the rose, rising from the cool cloth, calmed and quieted the fevered and aching head. There is a great tender comfort in it that needs no theory to explain it. The cool, fragrant cloth laid gently upon the burning forehead, in the long, hot dark of the fever, the soft smell of roses and the soft chill of the vinegar, the careful hand that lifts the warmed cloth and lays a cool one in its place, again and again through the long night, and the sick sinking a little deeper toward rest with each cool touch. The 21st recipe is a cooling green broth of sorrel and barley, a thin and gentle nourishment for the fevered who can take little else, and it stands between a medicine and a food, as so many of the best of the old remedies did. The sorrel is a low green herb of the meadow, with a sharp, clean, lemony sourness in its leaf, and that gentle sourness was held to cool the heat of the fever and to slake the burning thirst, while the barley gave a little soft strength to a body wasted by the sickness. To make the broth, you take a handful of barley and simmer it long and slow in water, as for the tisane, and then add to it a good handful of the fresh green sorrel leaves, and let them soften and give up their sharp green coolness into the broth, and season it lightly with a little salt, and give it warm by the spoonful to the fevered. It cooled and it nourished, and it slaked the thirst all at once, and it was easy upon the weakest stomach. And the gentle lemon sharpness of the sorrel made it pleasant to a mouth grown weary of plain barley water and sweet syrups. The master gave it in the slow days of recovery, when the fever had begun to break, and a little strength must be gently coaxed back into the wasted body, a few warm spoonfuls at a time, and there is a quiet hopefulness in it. The thin green broth of the mending fever, the first small step back from the burning country of the sickness toward the ordinary green world of the living. The 22nd recipe is a bitter draught of wormwood and centaury, made for the worst of all the old fevers, the ague that came and went in its strange and dreadful turns, the fever that the country people called the quartan ague, that would seize a sufferer with a fit of shaking cold and burning heat upon one day, leave them in peace for 2, and then return again upon the 4th, week after weary week, until the strength was wasted quite away. We know now that this was the fever we call malaria, carried by the bite of the marsh mosquito in the low wetlands near the sea, though the old masters did not know the cause, and blamed instead the bad air of the marshes, which is indeed where the name malaria comes from, the bad air. To fight it they reached for the strongest and the bitterest of their tonic herbs, the wormwood and the centaury, that low pink-flowered herb of the dry meadow, that is, if it can be believed, even more bitter than the wormwood itself. To make the draught, you steep the dried wormwood and the dried centaury together in wine or in water, and strain it, and give it bitter and strong before the fit was due to come. It did not cure the ague, for nothing they had could truly do that, but the bitter tonic herbs braced and strengthened the wasting body, and stirred the failing appetite, and so helped the sufferer to bear the long siege of the fever. And there is a poignancy in it, the old master measuring out his bitter herbs against a sickness he could not name and could not cure, doing the small good that he could in the face of the great evil that he could not, which is, in the end, the whole quiet courage of the old healing. The 23rd recipe is a famous old compound antidote, a thing meant to guard the body against poison and against the very pestilence itself, and it was called Digestion, which means simply the medicine of the 4, for it was made of 4 chief ingredients, no more. They were gentian, the bitter root of a mountain flower, and bayberries and myrrh, the fragrant gum of the East, and birthwort, an old herb much used against venom, and these 4 were ground small and worked up together with a great deal of honey into a soft brown electuary. It was the poor man's antidote, the simpler and the cheaper kin of the great and costly theriac that we shall come to next. And it was taken by the spoonful in times of plague and pestilence, in the hope of strengthening the body against the corrupt and poisonous airs that were believed to bring the sickness. And it was given too against the bites of venomous things, and against poison swallowed by mischance. Whether it did any true good against the plague we may well doubt, for nothing then could touch the terrible sickness, but the 4 bitter and aromatic herbs were at least sound and harmless tonics, and the taking of the spoonful, morning by morning, in the dread time of the pestilence, gave to the frightened people a thing to do, and a hope to hold, which is itself, in a fearful time, no small medicine. The master kept it always made up upon his shelf, in a wide brown jar, ready against the years when the sickness came up out of the ships in the harbour and went whispering through the narrow lanes of the town. The 24th recipe is the greatest and the most famous of all the old compound medicines, the king of the electuaries, the legendary antidote against all venoms and all poisons and the very plague. And it was called theriac, or in the older tongue, treacle. For our common word treacle, that now means only a sweet dark syrup, was once the name of this great medicine. It was a thing of fearful complexity, made not of 4 ingredients but of 60 and more, a vast confection of herbs and roots and gums and spices and strange costly things from the 4 corners of the earth, all ground small and worked up together with a great quantity of honey into a dark and fragrant electuary, and then, by the old rule, left to ripen and to mellow for many years, like a great wine, before it was thought fit to use. At its heart, strangely, lay a little of the flesh of the viper, the very poison serpent itself, for the old physicians held, by a deep and ancient logic, that the cure for the serpent's venom must hold within it something of the serpent. The making of true theriac was a great and solemn business, done openly in the public square of the great medical towns, under the eye of the masters of the school, so that none might cheat upon the costly ingredients, and a true and well-aged theriac was worth its weight in gold and more. It was given against the bite of every venomous thing, against poisons of every kind, against the plague and the pestilence, and against 100 inward ills besides, and it was trusted all across the world for the better part of 2,000 years. Most of its 60 ingredients did nothing, and a few may even have done a little quiet good, but its true power lay perhaps in the faith of the age in it, in the deep and unshakable belief that this dark and costly and long-ripened confection, this distillation of all the healing wisdom of the world, could stand between a frightened soul and death, and there is a kind of grandeur in it still, this great vain hopeful medicine, the highest the old art could reach. The 25th recipe is not swallowed at all, but carried, and worn and smelled, and it is the pomander, the little ball of sweet and aromatic things, carried against the breast to ward off the corrupt and pestilent air. The masters of Salerno, like all the physicians of their age, believed that the plague and the fevers came chiefly through the breathing in of foul and corrupted air, the bad air of the marsh and the sick room and the crowded town, and that a sweet and powerful scent, breathed in continually, could cleanse and strengthen the air about the wearer, and so keep the sickness off. To make a pomander, you take the sweetest and the most powerful of the aromatic things, a little musk and a little ambergris, those costly animal perfumes of the East, and rose petals and cloves and cinnamon and the fragrant gums, and you work them up with a little gum and a little wax into a soft fragrant paste, and roll it into a small ball and dry it hard, and set it within a little pierced case of silver or of gold, hung upon a chain about the neck or carried in the hand. The wearer would lift it often to the nose and breathe its strong sweet scent, especially when passing through the foul air of the crowded street or the chamber of the sick, and so, it was hoped, keep the pestilence at bay. We know now that the plague came not through the air at all, but through the bite of the flea upon the black rat, so the pomander could not do the great thing it was made for. And yet there is a melancholy beauty in the thought of it. The little golden ball of sweetness, held against the breast in the time of dread, the small breath of roses and spice drawn in against the great invisible terror, a fragrance set, hopelessly and bravely, against the dark. The 26th recipe is a cooling sharp water of wood, sorrel and lemon, given for the parched and bitter mouth of the fevered. When the tongue grows dry and furred and foul, and every drink tastes flat and warm and stale, the wood sorrel is a low woodland plant with leaves like small green hearts folded in three, and a sharp, clean, lemony sourness in its juice, much like the meadow sorrel, but gentler and finer, and the lemon, that bright, sour, golden fruit, came to the south with the Arabs and grew in great plenty upon the warm terraces above Salerno, filling the spring air with the scent of its blossom. To make the water, you take the fresh leaves of the wood sorrel and bruise them, and squeeze in a little of the sharp juice of the lemon, and steep them in cool water sweetened with a very little honey, and give it cool to the fever to sip, and to swill about the dry hot mouth. The clean sharp sourness of it cut through the fullness and the staleness of the fevered mouth, woke the dull and weary tongue, and slaked for a little while the deep burning thirst that the fever brought, and there was no surer comfort to a sufferer worn down by the long heat than the cool sharp shock of that lemon and sorrel water upon the parched tongue. A small clean coolness in the great dry burning of the sickness, like a window opened upon a fresh green morning in a close and stifling room. The 27th recipe is the last of our fever medicines, and it is a cooling wash of camphor and rosewater, laid upon the burning skin to draw away the outward heat of the fever, and with it we shall leave the country of the fevers and pass on to the dressing of wounds. Camphor is a white and crystalline thing, sharp and clean and penetrating of scent, one from the wood of a great tree of the Far East, and it has, as you may know if ever you have smelled it, a strange and powerful coolness, so that even to breathe it is to feel a chill upon the inward parts, and the old physicians prized it greatly as the very coldest of all the cooling medicines, fit for the hottest of fevers. To make the wash, you take a very little of the camphor, finely powdered and dissolved in a little spirit of wine, and stir it into a good quantity of cool rosewater, and with this fragrant cooling water you bathe the burning brow and breast and limbs of the fevered, sponging it gently over the hot dry skin. The camphor cooled and the rosewater soothed, and the clean sharp scent of the one and the soft sweet scent of the other together filled the close sick room with a fresh and reviving air, and the fevered, sponged with the cool fragrant water in the long heat of the night, would sigh and grow a little quieter and sink a little deeper toward the healing dark of sleep. Now let us go on gently, for we come now to one of the truest glories of the school of Salerno, the careful dressing of wounds, in which, more perhaps than in any other part of their art, the masters of that town were ahead of their whole age. For while in much of Europe a wound was bound up with any foul rag and left to fester, the surgeons of Salerno had learned, by long and careful watching, the great quiet truth that a clean wound heals and a dirty wound does not. And they washed their wounds and dressed them with a care that the world would not see again for many hundreds of years. Let us turn now to the salves and the waters for wounds and for the broken skin. The 28th recipe is the simplest and the greatest of all the wound medicines of Salerno, and it is nothing other than good wine, used to wash the wound clean. It seems too plain a thing to be called a recipe at all, and yet it was, in its quiet way, among the wisest things the old medicine ever did. When a wounded man was brought to the master, bleeding from a sword cut or a fall, or the bite of a beast, the first thing he did, before any salve or any binding, was to wash the wound out clean and thorough with good wine, pouring it freely over and into the wound to carry away the dirt and the clotted blood and the foulness, and only then to dress it. He did not know, as we now know, that the wine, being somewhat sharp and spirituous, killed in part the unseen creatures that breed corruption in a wound. But he had learned, by the long patient watching of his school, the plain truth of the matter, that a wound so washed grew clean and healed sweet and whole, while a wound left foul grew hot and swollen and ran with corruption, and all too often killed the man. The surgeons of Salerno, and after them the great surgeons of the medical schools that learned from her, washed their wounds clean with wine, when half the wounded of Europe were dying of the dirt in their hurts. And there is no single recipe in all our 100 tonight that saved more lives than this plainest of them all, the good wine poured freely and the wound made clean. The 29th recipe is one of the most remarkable of all the medicines of the old surgeons, a thing to bring a deep and dreamless sleep upon the wounded man, so that the surgeon might cut and set and sew without his feeling the pain of it, and it was called the spongia somnifera, the sleeping sponge. It was a true forerunner, in its rough and dangerous way, of the gentle sleep that the modern surgeon gives many hundreds of years before its time. To make it, you take a clean sea sponge, and you soak it full of the juices of the great sleep-bringing herbs, the juice of the opium poppy, and of the mandrake root, and of the henbane and the hemlock, all of them powerful and all of them, in too great a measure, deadly, and then you dry the sponge hard in the sun. When the time came for the cutting, the surgeon would moisten the dried sponge again in warm water, to wake the sleeping herbs, and hold it beneath the nose of the wounded man, that he might breathe in the strong fumes of the poppy and the mandrake, and so fall into a deep and senseless sleep. And when the cutting was done, another sponge soaked in the sharp juice of vinegar or fennel was held to his nose to rouse him again. It was a perilous medicine, for the line between the sleep that spares the pain and the sleep from which there is no waking was a narrow and an uncertain one, and many a surgeon must have lost a man to it. And yet it was a brave and a humane thing too, this old attempt to lift the dreadful pain of the surgery from the helpless body, and it shows us the deep kindness that ran, for all its limits, through the heart of the old healing, the long wish to spare the sufferer the pain, reaching out across 800 years toward the gentle sleep we know today. The 30th recipe is a cool and soothing ointment for the hot and angry wound, the wound grown red and swollen and inflamed, and it is one of the most famous of all the medieval salves, the rose ointment that the old books call unguentum rosatum, and that was sometimes named for the great physician Macew, whose receipt for it was much followed. We have met the cool and binding virtue of the rose already in the medicines of the stomach and the fever, and here it is put to the soothing of an inflamed and burning hurt. To make the ointment, you take a great quantity of fresh red rose petals, and you steep and warm them long and gently in clean oil and white wax, until the oil has drawn out the cool, sweet virtue of the flower and has turned to a soft, pale, rose-colored salve, fragrant with the dried sweetness of the rose. It was spread cool upon the hot and angry wound, and upon every inflamed and swollen and burning hurt, to cool the heat and to soothe the soreness and to ease the throbbing pain. And it was held one of the very best of all the cooling salves, gentle enough for the most tender place and the most delicate skin. It was used, the old books tell us, even upon the wounds of war, the deep hurts of the sword and the spear, to cool and to calm them after they had been washed and dressed. And there is a strange tenderness in that, the cool, sweet salve of crushed roses, laid upon the cruel wounds of battle, the gentlest of the garden's flowers, set against the hardest of the world's hurts. The 31st recipe is the kindest of all the old remedies for a burn, and it is a soft, cool dressing of the white of an egg beaten up with the cool oil of roses. The burn was a common and a dreadful hurt in those days of the open fire and the boiling pot and the candle and the torch, and the masters of Salerno knew well the great rule of the burn, which holds as true today as it did then, that the burn must be cooled and kept cool and soft and covered from the air. To make the dressing, you take the clear white of a fresh egg and beat it to a light froth, and beat into it a little of the cool oil of roses until it makes a smooth, pale, soothing cream, and this you spread soft and cool upon the burned skin, and lay over it a clean cloth, and renew it as it dries. The cool, slippery white of the egg soothed the fierce smarting of the burn, and kept the raw skin soft and covered from the stinging air, and the rose oil cooled and calmed and eased the pain, and the burn so dressed was kept from the cracking and the festering that the open air would bring, and healed the sweeter and the cleaner for it. It is a remedy still remembered in many an old country kitchen, the beaten white of an egg smoothed upon a small burn from the stove, and it is no foolish thing at all, but the true old wisdom of Salerno. The cool, soft covering laid gently upon the hot, raw hurt, carried down across the long centuries from the lamplit dispensary above the sea to the kitchen table of the present day. The 32nd recipe is a green poultice of plantain and comfrey, laid upon the wound to knit the broken flesh together, and these two were among the most trusted of all the old wound herbs, the herbs that the country people called, between them, by such names as the knitbone and the woundwort and the healing leaf. The plantain is that low, broad-leafed weed of every path and dooryard, the one with the long-ribbed leaves that springs up between the very stones. And the comfrey is a tall, rough-leafed herb of the damp ditch, with a thick, mucilaginous root, and both were held great healers of the wounded and the broken. To make the poultice, you take the fresh green leaves of the plantain and the bruised leaf and root of the comfrey, and you pound them together in the mortar into a cool green pulp, and spread it thick upon a clean cloth, and lay it upon the wound, and bind it gently in place, and renew it twice a day. The cool green pulp soothed the hurt and drew it together, and the comfrey, above all, was held to knit the torn flesh and even to mend the broken bone, which is why the country people called it knitbone. And there is a true virtue in it, for the comfrey root holds a substance that does indeed help the wounded flesh to close and to heal. The master kept a good store of both herbs, dried for the winter, hanging in their bunches from the dark beams, and in the summer he sent the children of the household out to gather the fresh green plantain from between the warm stones of the lane. The commonest weed in all the world, and one of the most quietly faithful of all the healers of the broken body. The 33rd recipe is a healing salve of honey, spread upon the foul and slow healing sore, the old ulcer or the festering wound that would not close. And it is one of the most ancient and one of the most truly effective of all the medicines in our whole 100. Honey, the sweet golden gift of the bee, was used as a wound salve from the most ancient times by the physicians of Egypt and of Greece and of Arabia long before Salerno, and the masters of Salerno used it still, spreading the clear thick honey upon the foul sore and binding it up clean. They did not know why it worked, but work it did, and the modern science has now learned the reasons, for honey is itself a thing that no corruption can live in, being too sweet and too drawing for the creatures of decay to grow within it, so that a honey-dressed wound stays clean, and the honey draws out the foulness, and keeps the hurt moist and soft, and heals it sweet and whole where many a harsher medicine would have failed. It is one of the great quiet vindications of the old healing, this golden salve, for after all the long centuries in which the learned medicine cast it aside as a mere old wives' remedy, the science of our own day has taken it up again, and the honey dressing is used once more, even now, upon the stubborn sore and the slow wound, exactly as the masters of Salerno used it 800 years ago, and exactly as the physicians of the ancient world used it long before them. The oldest of all the wound salves, and one of the very best. The 34th recipe is a green staunch of betony and yarrow, laid upon the fresh bleeding cut to stop the flow of the blood, for the first care of any wound, before the washing and the dressing, is to stay the bleeding, and the old masters had their trusted herbs for that quick and pressing need. The betony, that low purple flowered woodland herb we have met before, was among the most honored of all the medieval herbs, and the yarrow, with its flat heads of small white flowers and its fine feathery leaf, was the great wound herb of the battlefield, so trusted to staunch the bleeding of the sword cut that one of its old names was the soldier's woundwort, and another, in the old tales, was the herb of Achilles, the great warrior of the Greeks, who was said to have used it upon the wounds of his men. To make the staunch, you take the fresh green leaves of the betony and the yarrow, and you bruise them well, and lay them, bruised and green and wet with their own juice, straight upon the bleeding wound, and press them firm, and bind them there. The bruised herbs and the firm pressing together staunched the flow of the blood, and the yarrow above all was held, and rightly held, to help the blood to clot, and the bleeding to cease, for it holds in its leaf a true virtue toward that very end. There is something of the field of battle in this recipe. The quick, green handful of crushed leaves, pressed hard upon the bleeding hurt, far from any lamplit shop. And yet it came in the end to the master's book all the same, the soldier's rough wisdom, and the scholar's careful learning meeting upon the one torn page. The 35th recipe is a drawing and softening poultice of marshmallow and linseed, laid upon the hard and angry swelling to soften it, and to draw it to a head, and it is one of the gentlest and the most soothing of all the old dressings. The marshmallow is a tall, soft grey, leafed herb of the damp and salty ground, and its root, when it is cut and steeped in water, gives up a thick and slippery slime, a soft, soothing mucilage that the old physicians prized above almost everything for the easing of a hard and inflamed swelling, and indeed the very name of the herb, the marshmallow, has come down at last by a long strange road to the soft sweet white confection that still bears its name, though there is little enough of the herb left in it now. The linseed, the seed of the flax, gives up the same kind of soft, slippery, soothing slime when it is crushed and warmed in water. To make the poultice, you take the bruised marshmallow root and the crushed linseed, and you simmer them gently in water and a little oil into a soft, warm, slippery paste, and spread it thick and warm upon a cloth, and lay it upon the hard, hot swelling, and renew it warm again as it cools. The soft, warm, slippery poultice soothed the angry swelling and softened the hard and tender place, and drew the gathering matter gently to a head, and the gentle moist warmth of it eased the throbbing pain, and there could be no kinder thing to lay upon a hard and painful swelling than that soft, warm, soothing paste of marshmallow and flax, the most slippery and the most comforting of all the old drawing poultices. The 36th recipe is a warm plaster of turpentine and frankincense, laid upon the deep and serious wound to keep it clean and to help it heal from the bottom up. And it was one of the surgeon's most trusted dressings for a grave hurt. The turpentine of the old medicine was not the harsh thing we now think of, but the soft, fragrant resin that weeps from the pine and the larch, sticky and golden and clean of scent. And the frankincense is that costly pale gum of the East, the same that was burned upon the altars and laid before kings, with a clean and resinous and faintly lemony fragrance. Both were held among the great healers of wounds, for the resins, as the old masters had learned by long watching, keep a wound clean and sweet, and help the new flesh to grow. To make the plaster, you melt together the soft turpentine resin and the powdered frankincense with a little wax and a little oil into a warm, fragrant salve, and spread it upon a clean cloth, and lay it warm upon the deep wound after it has been washed clean. The fragrant resins kept the deep hurt from festering and corruption, and helped the wound to fill slowly from its depths with sound new flesh. And the clean piney scent of them filled the sick room with a smell more like a forest than a place of hurt. And there is a quiet rightness in it, for the modern science knows now that these old tree resins do indeed hold a true power against the creatures of corruption, so that the master, melting his fragrant pine gum over the low lamp, was doing, once again, a wiser thing than he could have known. The 37th recipe is a sharp cleansing wash of wormwood and vinegar, used against the worm in the wound, for in the warm south, in the days before the clean dressing was sure, a neglected wound might breed the small white maggots of the fly, a thing dreadful to the sufferer and to all about him, and the masters had their remedy even for that. To make the wash, you take the bitter wormwood, that silver herb whose very name in some tongues means the worm killer, and you steep it strong in good sharp vinegar, and with this bitter sour wash you cleanse out the wound, flushing it freely, for the bitterness of the wormwood and the sharpness of the vinegar together were held to kill and to drive out the worm and to cleanse the foulness, and then the wound was dressed clean and sweet again. The country people had long used the wormwood against every kind of worm and vermin, hanging it among the linen and strewing it upon the floor against the moth and the flea, and here it served the harder need of the wound, It is not a gentle recipe, this one, and it speaks of the harder side of the old surgery, the rough wounds of a rough age dressed in a hot country far from clean. And yet it speaks too of the same patient care that ran through all of it. The master bending over even the foulest and the most neglected of hurts, and doing, with his bitter herb and his sharp vinegar, what could be done to make it clean again. The 38th recipe is a soft, healing cerate of wax and oil, the simplest of all the salves, laid upon the chapped and the broken and the sore tender skin, and the old name for it, ceratum, comes straight from the Latin word for wax was the heart of it. A cerate was nothing more than oil and wax melted together, the wax to give it body and the oil to keep it soft, into a smooth pale salve that would spread easily and cling gently and keep the skin beneath it soft and covered from the drying air. To make the plainest of them, you take good clean olive oil, of which the warm south had such plenty, and white beeswax, and melt them gently together over a low fire, more oil than wax, and stir them as they cool into a smooth pale ointment, and into this you might work, if you would, a little rose water or a little of the cool oil of roses to sweeten and to soothe it further. It was spread upon the lips cracked by the cold dry wind, upon the hands chapped and split by the winter, upon the sore and the tender and the broken skin of every kind, to soften it and to soothe it and to cover it and to let it heal. It is the plain and humble grandfather of every soft salve and lip balm and hand cream upon the shelf of the chemist to this very day, the same old simple wisdom of the wax and the oil melted gently together, the softest and the kindest of all the coverings for a sore and weathered skin. And the master made it by the potful, for there was no week of the year in which someone did not come to him with a chap or a crack or a soreness that the soft pale cerate would ease. The 39th recipe is a healing oil of woundwort and of the herb we call Stiffened, made for the clean deep cut of the sword and the knife, and it is among the loveliest of all the old wound medicines to make and to behold. The Stiffened wort is a low herb of the summer meadow with small bright yellow flowers, and if you pinch one of its flowers or its leaves between the fingers, there comes out a deep blood-red juice, as though the plant itself bled, and the old herbalists, seeing this, were sure that a herb that bled so must surely be a great healer of bleeding wounds. To make the oil, you take a great handful of the fresh yellow flowers of the Stiffened wort, and you steep them in good olive oil in a clear glass jar, and set it in the warm sun for many weeks, until the oil has slowly drawn out the deep red virtue of the flowers, and has turned, day by day in the sun, from pale gold to a deep and glowing blood red. This red oil was rubbed gently upon the clean deep cut, and upon the bruise and the strained sinew and the aching nerve, to ease the pain and to help the hurt to heal. And there is a true virtue in it that the modern science confirms, for the Stiffened wort holds in its red oil things that soothe the wounded nerve and help the broken skin to mend. The master kept a row of the glass jars upon his sunny sill, the oil within them deepening slowly from gold to red through the long warm weeks of the summer, a quiet small alchemy of the sun and the flower. The meadow's gold turned to the wound's healing, red upon the windowsill above the sea. The 40th recipe is the last of our wound medicines, and it is a healing ointment for the old and stubborn ulcer, the sore that would not close after long months, and the old masters called it Digestion, a name that means the medicine of the juices, though by their day it had come to be made chiefly of litharge, a fine reddish powder of lead, boiled long and slow with oil. To make it, you take clean oil, and into it you stir the fine litharge, and boil and stir them together patiently over a low fire for hour upon hour, until by some quiet change the oil and the powder have joined and thickened into a smooth, pale, and oddly tough and pliant plaster that could be spread upon a cloth or worked into a soft mass with the warm hands. This plaster was laid upon the old ulcer and the long unhealed sore, to cover it and to soothe it and to coax it slowly toward the closing, and it was held one of the best of all the dressings for a stubborn hurt that nothing else would heal. We should be careful of it now, knowing as we do the slow poison that lies in the lead, and the old masters used more lead in their medicines than was good for any man. And yet the Digestion plaster itself, spread upon the unbroken outer skin, did a true and gentle good, and it endured, this old lead and oil plaster, for many hundreds of years, far down into the medicine of recent times, one of the longest lived of all the recipes of Salerno, the smooth, pale, stubborn plaster for the smooth, pale, stubborn sore. Now let us go on gently, and let us turn now to what is perhaps, of all our 100 recipes, the dearest to our purpose tonight, the gentle medicines that the masters of Salerno made for sleep, and for the quieting of a troubled and a wakeful mind. For they understood, as well as any healer of any age, that sleep is the great healer, the deep restorer, the medicine that the body makes for itself when only it is let, and they gathered many soft and quiet recipes to coax a wakeful sufferer down toward its dark and gentle shore. Let us turn now, then, to the gentle recipes for sleep and for a quiet mind, and as we walk among them, let your own breath grow a little slower and your own eyes a little heavier, for these are the very recipes that were made 800 years ago for the bringing of a tired soul to rest. The 41st recipe is the chief of all the old sleeping medicines, the syrup of the poppy that the masters called Digestion, the medicine of the poppy heads, for it was made from the seed heads of the opium poppy, that pale and lovely flower whose milky juice holds the deepest sleep of all the garden. The poppy was known to the physicians of the most ancient world as the surest bringer of sleep and the surest easer of pain, and the masters of Salerno used it with a careful and a knowing hand, in measured and gentle doses, well aware that the same poppy that brings the kindly sleep will, in too great a measure, bring the sleep from which there is no waking. To make the gentle syrup, you take the dried seed heads of the poppy, not the strong raw juice but the milder heads, and you simmer them long and slow in water, until the water has drawn out their soft, sleepy virtue, and then you strain it and boil it gently with sugar into a smooth, dark syrup. A small spoonful was given in a little warm water to the sleepless, to the one worn out with pain, to the racking cough that would not let the sufferer rest, and it brought a soft and a heavy drowsiness stealing over the body, and eased the pain, and quieted the cough, and let the weary sink at last into the deep, dark sleep that the long sickness had denied them. It was the most powerful and the most precious of all the master's gentle medicines, kept in a small dark bottle and given out with the most careful hand, the deepest kindness and the gravest danger in the one dark drop, the very gift of sleep itself, drawn from the pale petals of a flower. The 42nd recipe is far gentler and wholly safe, a soft drowsy water of the seed and the leaf of the wild lettuce that brings only the faintest and the kindliest invitation toward sleep. We met the cool wild lettuce among the fever medicines for its cooling green nature, but it was used too for sleep, for its milky sap holds a soft and gentle sleepy principle, far milder than the poppy, that the old physicians called the poor man's poppy, and that the modern science has indeed confirmed to hold a true if gentle drowsy virtue. To make the water, you take the seed of the wild lettuce, or the leaves of it, and you steep them in hot water to make a soft green infusion, and sweeten it a little with honey, and drink it warm a little before the bed. It does not seize the mind with sleep as the poppy does, but only loosens it gently toward rest, easing the body and quieting the busy thoughts and inviting, softly and without force, the slow coming of sleep, so that it might be given freely and without fear to any restless soul, even to the child who could not settle, even to the old whose nights had grown thin and broken. There is a great gentleness in this recipe, the soft green sleepy water of the common lettuce, the kindest and the safest of all the old invitations to sleep, asking nothing and forcing nothing, only opening the door a little softly toward the dark and leaving the tired body free to drift through it at its own slow pace or not, exactly as it would. The 43rd recipe is a soft, sweet conserve of violets and roses to quiet the hot and troubled head and to calm the restless mind toward sleep, and it is among the prettiest and the most fragrant of all the old calming medicines. We have met the cool, gentle virtue of both these flowers already, the rose and the violet, the two great cool and kindly flowers of the old healing, and here they are joined to soothe and to quiet a head grown hot and busy and overwrought, that could not let its thoughts lie still enough for sleep. To make the conserve, you take a great quantity of the fresh petals of the red rose and the blue violet, and you pound them fine in the mortar with sugar, working them long until the flowers and the sugar have become a soft, fragrant, faintly purple paste, and this you pot and keep. A small spoonful was taken at the close of the day, or given to the feverish and overwrought, to cool and to quiet, and to gladden the troubled head, for the soft, sweet scent and the gentle, cool nature of the flowers were held to calm the heated spirits and to ease the restless mind toward its rest. There is a deep gentleness in the very idea of it, that the medicine for a mind too busy to sleep should be a sweet spoonful of crushed flowers, the cool quiet of the rose, and the violet gathered and pressed and kept against the wakeful nights, a little taste of the still summer garden taken upon the tongue in the dark, to call the racing thoughts home, and to lay them softly down to rest. The 44th recipe is a stronger and a more dangerous thing, an oil of henbane rubbed gently upon the temples and the brow to bring on sleep, and the master used it with a most careful hand, for the henbane is one of the great drowsy poisons of the old garden, kin to the deadly nightshade, and not to be taken inwardly save by the most knowing healer. The henbane is a coarse and clammy plant of the waste ground, with dull yellow flowers veined with a sick purple, and a heavy and an evil smell, and its seed and leaf hold a powerful sleepy poison that the old physicians knew well both to fear and to use. To make the oil for the temples, which is the safest of all its uses, You steep the leaves and seeds of the henbane gently in warm oil to draw out their sleepy virtue, and strain it, and with a very little of this oil the master would anoint the temples and the brow and behind the ears of one tormented by a long sleeplessness or a raging pain in the head, that a little of the drowsy virtue might be drawn in softly through the skin, far more gently and far more safely than if it had been swallowed. It eased the pain and brought a heaviness upon the eyes and a slow coming of sleep. And the master used it for the worst of the wakeful sufferers, those whom nothing gentler would ease, anointing the brow with the smallest measure of the drowsy oil in the lamplight, his careful fingers moving slow and gentle upon the aching temples of the sleepless, coaxing with the dangerous kindly herb the rest that the poor sufferer could not find alone. The 45th recipe is the most powerful and the most perilous of all the old sleep medicines, the wine of mandrake. That was given for the deepest sleep of all, the sleep of the surgeon's knife, and it must be told of with a careful word, for the mandrake is among the most dangerous of all the plants of the garden, and the old masters used it only with the greatest fear and the greatest skill. The mandrake is a low plant with a great forked root that the old folk fancied was shaped like a little man, and many strange and dreadful tales gathered about the digging of it. But its true power lay in the strong, sleepy poison in its root, akin to the henbane and the nightshade, that brings, in careful measure, a deep and senseless sleep, and, in careless measure, death. To make the wine, the old physicians steeped a little of the dried mandrake root in wine, in a careful and a measured dose, and gave it to the one who must be cut, that he might sink into a deep sleep and not feel the surgeon's knife, much as the sleeping sponge was used, and indeed the mandrake was one of the very herbs of that sponge. It was a medicine to be used only by a master, only in the gravest need, only in the most careful measure, for the danger of it was very great, and yet it was, in its perilous way, another of the old kindnesses of the healing art, another of the long brave attempts to lift the unbearable pain from the body of the sufferer, to draw the dark curtain of a deep sleep across the dreadful hour of the cutting, and to let the wounded wake again, gently, into a world where the worst was already past. The 46th recipe brings us back to the safe and the gentle, and it is a warm, fragrant bath of chamomile and dill taken just before the bed, to soothe the whole tired body and to coax it softly towards sleep. And it was one of the kindest and the most pleasant of all the old ways to a good night's rest. We have met both these gentle herbs before, the soft apple-sweet chamomile and the warm, comforting dill, and here they are joined in the warm water of the evening bath. To make it, you take a great handful of the dried chamomile flowers and the dill, and you steep them in hot water to make a strong, fragrant infusion, and pour it into the warm bath, or if there was no bath to be had, you steep them in a basin and bathe with the warm, fragrant water the feet and the hands and the brow before climbing into the bed. The warm water eased the tired and the aching limbs, and the soft, sweet scent of the chamomile and the dill, rising in the warm steam, quieted and gladdened the weary mind, and the whole gentle ritual of it, the warmth and the fragrance, and the slow, unhurried washing at the close of the day, drew the body down out of the cares of the waking world toward the soft shore of sleep. There is nothing in all the modern art of sleep that is truly any better than this. the warm, fragrant bath at the close of the day, and the master gave it gladly and often, for it cost little, and it eased much. And there could be no sweeter way to make ready for the dark than to sink the tired body into the warm chamomile water and breathe the soft apple scent of it rising in the steam. The 47th recipe is not a thing to be drunk or eaten at all, but a thing to be slept upon, and it is the herb pillow, the small chestful or sackful of dried sweet herbs laid beneath the head of the sleepless to breathe their soft scent through the long night. The masters of Salerno, and the country good wives long before them, knew well that certain soft scents quiet the mind and invite the sleep, and so they made small pillows and bags of dried herbs to lay within the bed. To make one, you take a small bag of soft clean linen, and you fill it with the dried flowers of the herbs, most apt to bring on sleep, the dried hops with their soft, drowsy resin, the dried roses for their gentle calm, the dried lavender for its sweet quieting scent, and a little of the chamomile and the sweet woodruff besides, and you sew it closed and lay it within the pillow or beneath the cheek, so that the warmth of the head draws out the soft scent of the herbs through the long night. The dried hops above all were held a great bringer of sleep, and they are no idle fancy, for the soft resin of the hop does hold a true drowsy virtue, as the modern science agrees, and the gentle scents of the lavender and the rose quieted and soothed the wakeful mind toward its rest. It is a recipe still made and still loved to this very day, the small herb pillow tucked beneath the cheek, the soft scent of lavender and hops, and rose breathed in slowly in the dark. And if you have ever laid your own head upon such a pillow, then you have shared, across 800 years, in one of the gentlest of all the recipes of Salerno. The 48th recipe is a cordial water of borage and biglos, given to lift a heart sunk too low in sorrow to rest, for the old masters knew that some sleeplessness comes not from a busy mind, but from a heavy one, from the grief and the melancholy that lie too sore upon the heart to let it rest, and for that they had their gentle gladdening cordials. The borage and the buglos are two cousins, rough-leafed herbs of the garden, with bright star-shaped flowers of the loveliest sky blue, and they were held, above almost all other herbs, to gladden and to lift the heavy heart, so that there was an old saying, that the borage brings always courage, and the flowers were floated, fresh and blue, in the cup of wine to cheer the drinker. To make the cordial water, you steep the flowers and the leaves of the borage and the buglos in wine or in water, sweetened with a little sugar, and give it to one weighed down with grief and sleeplessness, to lift a little the heavy spirit and to ease the sad heart toward its rest. There is a gentle wisdom in it, that the cure for the sleeplessness of sorrow should not be a thing to force the body down, but a thing to lift the heart up, a small blue gladness floated in the evening cup. The bright star flowers of the summer garden set against the long grey weight of grief, easing the heavy heart just enough that it might lay its sorrow down a little while and rest. The 49th recipe is a warm spiced posset of nutmeg and mace, given for the restless mind that will not quiet itself for sleep, and it is one of the warmest and the most comforting of all the old bedtime drinks. The nutmeg and the mace are two spices of the one fruit, the hard brown seed and the lacy red coat about it, brought from the far islands of the east, warm and sweet and faintly heady of scent, and the nutmeg above all, was held to have a gentle drowsy virtue, a soft warm heaviness that it laid upon the busy mind, which is no idle fancy, for the nutmeg does indeed hold a faint sleepy principle, though it must be used in the small measure of the kitchen, and never more, for in any great quantity it grows dangerous. To make the posset, you take warm milk, or warm sweetened wine, and into it you grate a little nutmeg and a little of the mace, and stir in a little honey, and drink it warm and slow in the quiet, just before the bed. The warm sweet drink comforted the body, and the soft heady scent and the gentle drowsy virtue of the nutmeg quieted the restless mind, and the whole slow unhurried drinking of it, warm and sweet and fragrant, in the last of the lamplight, drew the wakeful soul down gently toward the dark, and the master gave it gladly to the busy-minded and the careworn, the warm spiced cup held in 2 hands, the soft scent of nutmeg rising in the steam, the slow sweet warmth spreading through the body, like the first soft drowsiness of sleep itself. The 50th recipe, the very middle of our 100, is a fragrant water of balm, the herb that the old physicians called melissa, given to gladden the heart and to quiet the spirit toward a peaceful sleep, and it is one of the loveliest and the most beloved of all the gentle calming herbs. The balm, or lemon balm, is a soft green leafed herb of the garden with a clean bright scent of lemons when its leaf is bruised, and it was held above almost every other herb to lift the heavy spirit, to drive away sadness and dark thoughts, and to quiet the troubled and the wakeful mind, so that an old physician of Arabia wrote that the balm makes the heart merry and glad, and the masters of Salerno trusted it greatly to the same kind end. To make the water, you take a great handful of the fresh green leaves of the balm, and steep them in hot water to draw out their soft lemony virtue into a fragrant infusion, and drink it warm and sweetened a little with honey in the quiet of the evening. The clean bright scent of it gladdened the spirit, and the gentle nature of it quieted the mind, and it eased away the small sadnesses and the small frettings of the long day, and drew the heart down softly toward a calm and untroubled rest. It is a herb still loved and still trusted to this very day for exactly these gentle ends, the lemon balm tea of the quiet evening, and the modern science has begun to confirm what the old masters knew by long watching, that this soft lemon-scented leaf does indeed quiet the anxious mind and ease the way toward a peaceful sleep, so that in drinking it you would drink the very same gentle comfort that was drunk in the lamplit rooms of Salerno 800 years ago. The 51st recipe is a precious electuary of saffron and honey, given against the sleeplessness that comes of melancholy, of the dark and heavy sadness that the old masters called the black bile. And it is one of the costliest and one of the most golden of all the medicines in our 100. The saffron is the dried scarlet thread from the heart of a small autumn flowering crocus, and it took so many thousands of the flowers, each picked by hand and each yielding but 3 small threads to make the smallest measure of it, that it was, weight for weight, among the most costly things in all the world, and it has remained so to this very day. But the old physicians prized it above its great cost, for the saffron was held the very chief of all the gladdening medicines, a thing to drive away the deepest sadness and to lift the most leaden heart. And there was an old saying that a man who has eaten saffron will laugh though he be dying. To make the electuary, you take a little of the precious saffron, ground to a fine red dust, and work it up with clear honey into a soft golden paste. And a very small spoonful was given to one sunk in the dark, sleepless heaviness of melancholy, to gild and to lighten the sad spirit, and to ease it toward its rest. There is a true virtue in it that the modern science is now confirming, for the saffron does indeed hold things that lift the sad and heavy mind. And there is a quiet wonder in the thought of it, that the same costly golden thread that colored the feasts of kings was given by the careful spoonful to gild the dark and sleepless sorrow of the grieving heart, and to coax it gently toward the kindness of sleep. The 52nd recipe is the simplest and the homeliest of all the sleep medicines: a warm soft pap of bread and milk with a little honey and a thread of saffron, given to the weak and the very old and the small fretful child, to settle the stomach and to warm the body and to coax it gently toward sleep. And it is hardly a medicine at all, but rather a kind of tender nursery comfort raised to the dignity of the Master's great book. To make it, you take warm milk, and into it you crumble soft white bread until it has swelled and softened to a smooth warm pap, and you stir in a little honey for its sweetness and its gentle goodness, and a single thread of the precious saffron for its golden color and its gladdening virtue, and you give it warm by the spoonful at the close of the day. There is no great theory in it, only the deep old wisdom that a warm and gentle fullness in the belly draws the body towards sleep, that the weak and the old and the very young are soothed and settled by a warm, soft, sweetened food, and that the small ritual of the warm spoonfuls, given slowly in the quiet of the evening, is itself a comfort and a calming. The Master gave it to the convalescent too weak for any heavier food, and to the old whose teeth and stomach could bear no more, and to the small child who woke crying in the night, the warm, sweet golden pap upon the horn spoon. And there could be no gentler note on which to leave the recipes of sleep than this, the oldest and the kindest of all the comforts. The warm, sweet food given softly in the dark to ease a tired soul down into rest. The 53rd recipe is the last of our sleep medicines, and it is the evening fumigation of frankincense and rose, the sweetening and the calming of the very air of the sleeping chamber. And with it we shall leave the country of sleep and pass on to the famous receipts of the women of Salerno. The old masters held that the air a sufferer breathed was itself a part of the healing, and that a sweet and fragrant air quieted the spirit and made ready the chamber for rest. And so they would, in the last quiet hour before the bed, perfume the sleeping room with a soft, sweet smoke. To make the fumigation, you take a little of the costly frankincense, that pale, fragrant gum of the East with its clean and lifting scent, and a little dried rose, and you cast them upon a small dish of glowing embers set in the corner of the chamber, so that a thin, blue, fragrant smoke rises slowly and spreads its sweetness through the room. The clean, lifting scent of the frankincense and the soft, sweet ghost of the rose together filled the chamber with a still and holy fragrance, like the air of a great church at the close of the day. And the sufferer, breathing it in slowly as the lamp burned low, would feel the small frets and cares of the long day loosen and fall away, and the quiet of the fragrant dark settle softly over the mind, and sleep comes stealing gently in upon the thin blue rising smoke. It is the last and the most peaceful of all our recipes for the night, the sweet smoke rising slow in the corner of the darkened room, the soft scent of frankincense and rose, the lamp burning low, the long day done, and nothing left in all the quiet fragrant dark but the slow and gentle coming on of sleep. Now let us go on, gently, for we come now to one of the things that made Salerno most remarkable in all its age, the learning and the practice of its women. For Salerno, almost alone among the schools of medieval Europe, made a place for women in the healing art, and there grew up there a body of writing on the medicine of women, the care of the woman in childbed and in sickness, and in the keeping of her beauty, that has come down to us under the name of one of those women, Trotter of Salerno, gathered with 2 other texts into the work we call the Trotula. These were the most read and the most trusted books on the medicine of women in all of Europe for hundreds of years, and from them, and from the practice of the women healers of the town, our next recipes are drawn. Let us turn now, then, to the receipts of the women of Salerno. The 54th recipe is a soothing bath and oil for the woman worn out and aching after the long labor of bringing a child into the world, and it is among the tenderest of all the receipts in the books of the women of Salerno. The bearing of a child was, in those days, the hardest and the most dangerous thing that most women would ever do, and the women healers of Salerno gave great and gentle care to the new mother after her ordeal, to ease her aching and exhausted body and to help her mend. To make the soothing bath, you take the softening and the soothing herbs, the marshmallow and the mallow, the chamomile and the linseed, and the soft sweet violet, and you make a strong warm infusion of them, and the new mother was bathed in the warm fragrant water, or it was used to bathe and to foment the parts most worn and torn by the birth. And afterward she was anointed gently with a soft warm oil of roses and violets and sweet almonds, to soothe and to soften, and to ease the aching flesh. The warm soft water and the gentle fragrant oil eased the soreness of the worn body, and quieted the spirit worn thin by the long pain and the long fear, and there is a deep and a beautiful kindness in it. The tired new mother sunk into the warm soothing herb bath in the quiet, after the storm of the birth, the soft scent of mallow and chamomile and violet about her, the gentle anointing hands, the whole tender care of one woman for another, in the worn and aching aftermath of the hardest of all the works of the body. The 55th recipe is a warm bath of mugwort and pennyroyal, made for the woman whose monthly courses had grown slow or had stopped, to bring them on again. For the women healers of Salerno held that the regular flow of the courses was needful to a woman's health, and that to bring on a stopped or a tardy flow was a chief part of their art. The mugwort, that tall grey-green roadside herb that the old folk called the mother of herbs, and the pennyroyal, a small creeping mint with a sharp and powerful scent, were both held among the great herbs of the woman's flow, and a warm bath or a warm fermentation of them was one of the gentler and the safer ways to use their virtue. To make it, you take a great quantity of the mugwort and the pennyroyal, and you steep them in much hot water to make a strong and fragrant infusion, and the woman would sit in the warm bath of it, or bathe and foment the lower body with the warm herb water, so that the warmth and the virtue of the herbs might draw and ease and bring on the slow course. The warm water itself eased and relaxed the body, and the herbs were held to draw and to move, and the women of Salerno used this gentle outward way by preference, the warm bath and the warm cloth, as kinder and far safer than the drinking of the strong herbs, which they knew well to be a perilous thing, and there is once again that careful kindness in it, the choosing always of the gentlest way that would serve, the warm fragrant bath before the dangerous draught. The 56th recipe is a healing sitz bath of rose and mallow for the soreness of the lower body after the birth, a small warm shallow bath in which the new mother might sit to soothe and to heal the parts most hurt by the bringing forth of the child. We have met the cool soothing rose and the soft slippery mallow many times now, and here they are joined again in this tenderest of uses. To make it, you take the dried rose petals and the soft leaves and roots of the mallow and the marshmallow, and you make of them a strong warm infusion and pour it into a wide shallow vessel, and the new mother would sit in the warm soothing water for a while, twice or thrice in the day, to bathe and to ease and to heal the sore and torn and aching flesh. The soft slippery mallow soothed and softened, and the cool sweet rose calmed and gently bound, and the simple warmth of the water eased the deep soreness and helped the hurt to mend. And there could be no gentler nursing of so tender a hurt. It is a recipe still used and still trusted to this very day, the warm sitz bath for the soreness after the birth, sometimes with the very same soothing herbs, and the modern mother, sinking gratefully into the warm soothing water in the worn days after her child is born, is taking, without knowing it, the very comfort that the women healers of Salerno gave to the mothers of their town 800 years ago. The 57th recipe is a warm drink of fenugreek and dill to bring on, and to increase the milk of the nursing mother, for the feeding of the newborn at the breast was, in those days, a matter of life and death, there being no sure other way to feed a babe, and the women healers had their trusted herbs to help the milk to come and to flow. The fenugreek is a small clover-like herb of the warm south, whose hard golden seed has a strong and curious scent, something between hay and maple, and it was held, from the most ancient times, and in many lands, the very chief of all the herbs, to bring on the mother's milk, and the dill, that soft feathery herb of the garden, was held to the same gentle end. To make the drink, you take the bruised seed of the fenugreek and the seed of the dill, and you steep them or gently simmer them in water or in milk to make a warm, fragrant drink, sweetened a little with honey, and the nursing mother drank it warm several times in the day to bring on and to increase her milk. There is a true and a lasting virtue in it, for the fenugreek is used to this very day by nursing mothers the world over to help the milk to flow, and the modern science grants it a real, if gentle, power to that end. So that here again the old watching of the women of Salerno reached the right thing, the warm fragrant drink of fenugreek and dill given to the new mother in the early days, to help the ancient quiet miracle of the milk, the feeding of the new life from the body of the old. The 58th recipe is a soothing and an aromatic pessary of quince and rose, made for the woman troubled by the falling or the sinking of the womb, a complaint not uncommon after many hard births, and it shows the careful and the gentle skill of the women healers in the most intimate of their cares. The women of Salerno understood, by their long practice, the particular weaknesses and hurts that came to the body of a woman who had borne many children, and they had their remedies for them, made gentle and aromatic and soothing. To make this one, you take the binding astringent quince and the cool binding rose, and you make of them, with a little wax and a little soothing oil, a small, soft, soothing, and gently astringent shape, fragrant and mild. That was used to ease and to support, and to draw up gently the sunk and aching part. The binding virtue of the quince and the rose held to strengthen and to firm the relaxed flesh. We need not dwell too closely upon the manner of its use, but the gentleness and the care of it is worth the noting. The choosing of the soft and the fragrant, and the soothing for so tender and so private a hurt. The quiet skill of the women healers bent upon the easing of a trouble that the male physicians of the age would scarcely speak of, and that the suffering women could speak of only to one another, and to the wise and gentle women of Salerno, who had made it their particular care. The 59th recipe is not one remedy, but a gentle art, the art of the sweet and the foul fumigation, used by the women healers of Salerno to draw or to drive the wandering whim, for they held, after the old physicians of Greece, the strange belief that the womb itself might wander and rise within the body, and bring on many troubles, and that it might be coaxed back to its place by scent, for they thought it would flee from a foul smell and follow a sweet one. To draw the womb downward, they would set a small dish of sweet and fragrant burning things, the rose and the frankincense and the sweet aromatic gums, below the woman, that the wandering part might be drawn down toward the sweetness, while at the same time a foul and acrid smell, the burning of some rank and evil-smelling thing, might be held to the nose above, that the part might be driven down away from the foulness. The belief beneath it was wholly mistaken, for the womb does not wander at all, and yet there is a strange interest in the recipe still, for it shows us how the old healers, working always from a wrong picture of the body, yet reached so often by their gentle means toward a real comfort. For the breathing of sweet calming scents, and the whole quiet ritual of the careful tending would themselves have soothed a distressed and an anxious woman, whatever the true nature of her trouble, and the women of Salerno, kneeling by their patient with their dishes of sweet and acrid smoke, were doing, however mistaken their reasons, a tender and a calming thing. The 60th recipe is a gentle remedy of sage and honey for the woman who longed for a child and could not conceive one, made by the women healers with all the careful sympathy that so deep a sorrow asked. And the sage stood at the heart of it, that grey-green herb of long life and of healing that we have met so many times, and that was held among its many virtues to help the woman toward the bearing of a child. There was an old tale, told in the warm south, that after a great plague had emptied a town of its people, the women were bidden to drink the juice of the sage, that they might the sooner fill the empty cradles again. And whether the tale be true or no, the sage was long held a herb of fruitfulness as well as of health. To make the remedy, the women healers would take the fresh green sage and bruise it, and steep it gently in a little wine, or work its juice up with honey, and give it to the woman to take over many days, with much gentle counsel besides on the warming and the strengthening of the body. We cannot say that the sage could truly do the great thing that was hoped of it, but we may say that the women of Salerno met the deep and private sorrow of the childless woman, not with scorn or with neglect, but with a gentle herb and a gentle word, and the whole careful sympathy of their art. And there is a tenderness in that across the 800 years, the wise woman and the sorrowing woman bent together over the cup of sage and honey in the lamplight, hoping and tending and being kind. The 61st recipe turns from the medicine of the body to the keeping of the skin. For the women of Salerno wrote not only of sickness and of childbirth, but of beauty and of the gentle care of the skin and the hair. And this one is a soft cleansing wash of ground almonds and rosewater for the face, to soften and to soothe a skin grown rough and chapped by the weather. To make it, you take sweet almonds, blanched and ground to a fine smooth meal, and you mix them with rose water into a soft pale paste. And with this gentle paste the face was washed and smoothed, and then rinsed clean with more rose water. The soft oily almond meal cleansed the skin gently and left it soft and smooth, far more kindly than any harsh soap. And the rose water soothed and freshened it, and left upon it the faint sweet ghost of the rose. And the women of Salerno held this gentle almond wash among the best of all the ways to keep the skin of the face soft and fair, and unchapped through the rough weather of the year. It is, in truth, the direct and unbroken ancestor of the gentle cleansing creams and the soft scrubs upon the shelf of the beauty shop to this very day. Many of them made still of the very same ground almond and sweet rosewater, and there is a quiet pleasure in the thought of it, that the gentle care a woman takes of her own face in the soft light of the morning is the very same care, the very same soft almond paste and sweet rose water, that the women of Salerno wrote down for the ladies of their town 800 years ago. The 62nd recipe is a fragrant wash for the hair, to cleanse it and to perfume it, and to leave it soft and shining. And it is one of the most famous and the most lovely of all the receipts in the books of the women of Salerno, a recipe that has come down to us almost word for word from the 12th century, called in the old books the wash of the beautiful woman. To make it, you take the dried red roses, and the cloves, and the nutmeg, and the watercress seed, and the fragrant root of the galangal, all ground small, and you boil them together with rose water, and with this warm, fragrant water the hair was washed and combed through. The fragrant spices and the rose cleansed the hair and perfumed it sweetly, so that it carried the soft scent of roses and cloves all the day long, and the whole gentle washing of it, the warm fragrant water and the slow careful combing, left the hair soft and shining and sweet. It is a recipe so pleasant and so fragrant that women of the present day, reading it in the old translated books, have made it up again for the pure delight of it, and found it good. And there is something very near and very human in that. The warm rose and clove-scented water of 800 years ago, made up once more in a modern kitchen. The same soft fragrance rising in the steam. The same slow pleasure of the sweet washed hair, a small bright thread of shared delight, reaching unbroken across all the long centuries between. The 63rd recipe is a softening and a soothing ointment of saffron and lily, made by the women of Salerno to ease, and to smooth the marks and the roughnesses of the skin, and to lend the face a soft and even fairness, and it joined two of the most prized of all the gentle beauty herbs. The white lily, with its great fragrant trumpet flowers, was held a great softener and smoother of the skin, its root and its bulb steeped in oil to draw out a soothing softening virtue. And the saffron, that costly golden thread, lent a soft, warm golden color, and was held to brighten and to even the skin. To make the ointment, you take the soothing oil drawn from the lily, and you work into it a little of the precious saffron and a little soft wax, into a smooth, pale, golden salve, fragrant and soft, and with this the skin was gently anointed and smooth. The soft lily oil soothed and softened the rough and chapped skin, and the saffron lent it a gentle, warm fairness, and the women of Salerno held it among the kindest of all their salves for a weathered, or a marked, or a roughened face. There is a gentleness even in the vanity of it, if vanity it be. This soft golden salve of lily and saffron smoothed slowly upon the tired face in the soft light of the evening. The wish to be soft and fair, and at ease in one's own skin being, after all, no shameful thing, but only one more of the small human gentlenesses that the women of Salerno understood so well and met so kindly, with their soft and fragrant arts. The 64th recipe is a cooling and a brightening eye water made by the women of Salerno for the tired or the reddened eyes of the lady. A gentle wash of rose and marshmallow and violet to soothe and to refresh the eyes worn with weeping, or with the close work of the needle, or the long reading of the book. To make it, you take the cool, soothing rose, and the soft, slippery marshmallow, and the cool, gentle violet, and you make of them a clear, soft infusion in pure water, and strain it very carefully clean through a fine cloth, that no least mote might remain to trouble the tender eye. And with this cool, clear, fragrant water, the eyes were bathed, and the lids were gently wiped. The cool rose soothed the heat and the redness. The soft marshmallow eased and lubricated the dry and tired eye, and the gentle violet calmed and refreshed, and the whole soft, cool washing of the eyes was a comfort and a relief to one whose eyes ached and burned with weariness. There is a great gentleness in the care of so tender a part, and the women of Salerno took the greatest pains over the cleanness and the softness of their eye waters, knowing well how easily the eye is hurt. And there is something restful in the very thought of it. The cool, clear rose and violet water bathed softly upon the tired and aching eyes at the close of a long day. The heat and the redness and the weariness washed gently away, the eyes left cool and soothed and ready for the kindly dark of sleep. The 65th recipe is a fragrant tooth powder of frankincense and mastic, made by the women of Salerno to clean the teeth and to fasten them, and to leave the breath sweet. For the keeping of the teeth and the sweetness of the breath was a part of their gentle art that they did not neglect. To make it, you take the fragrant gums, the frankincense and the mastic, both of them clean and resinous and sweet of scent, and you grind them to a fine powder, perhaps with a little dried mint or a little of the pungent root to add to their virtue. And with this fragrant powder, rubbed upon the teeth and the gums with a soft cloth or a frayed twig, the teeth were cleaned and polished. The fine powder cleaned and brightened the teeth. The resinous gums were held to fasten the loose tooth and to firm and to heal the soft and bleeding gum, and the clean sweet scent of the frankincense and the mastic left the mouth fresh and the breath sweet. The chewing of the mastic gum for the sweetening of the breath and the cleaning of the teeth is older even than Salerno, and the women of the town used it still in this fragrant powder, and there is a near and homely pleasure in the thought of it, that the simple daily care of the clean teeth and the sweet breath, that we think so modern a nicety, was tended just as carefully, with the very same clean, fragrant resins, by the women of Salerno 800 years ago, in the soft light of the southern morning, by the window above the sea. The 66 recipe is a soft, soothing lip salve of honey and rose, the last of the gentle receipts of the women of Salerno, made to ease and to soften and to sweeten the lip cracked and chapped and sore from the cold, dry wind or the heat of the summer sun. To make it, you take clear honey, that softens and that heals, and a little of the cool oil of roses, and a little soft wax to give it body, and you melt and work them gently together into a smooth, soft, fragrant salve, faintly sweet of the honey and soft with the scent of the rose. And with this the sore and cracked lips were anointed and softened and healed. The honey soothed and healed the small cracks and soreness. The rose oil cooled and softened and eased, and the wax held a gentle covering over the tender lip against the drying air, and the whole soft salve left the lips soft and smooth and faintly sweet. It is, once more, the direct and unbroken ancestor of the soft lip balm in the pocket of nearly everyone alive to this very day, made still, very often, of the very same honey and wax and soft sweet oil. And there is a quiet wonder in that long unbroken thread, the small soothing comfort smoothed upon the sore lip in the cold of the winter, reaching back, unchanged in all its kindness, across the whole long road of years to the lamplit rooms of the women of Salerno, above the warm southern sea. Now let us go on gently, and let us turn now to the recipes the masters of Salerno made for two of the smallest and the most tender parts of the body, and two of the most easily troubled, the eyes and the teeth. For the eye is the most delicate of all the organs of the body, and the most easily hurt, and the most sorely missed when it fails, and the tooth, when it aches, can bring the strongest man to his knees, with a pain out of all proportion to its small size. And the masters of Salerno had gathered, over their long centuries, a great store of gentle waters, and washes and powders for the easing of both. Let us turn now, then, to the recipes for the eyes, and for the aching tooth. The 67th recipe is a clearing and a strengthening water of eyebright and fennel, given for the eye, whose sight had grown dim and weak and clouded, to brighten and to strengthen the failing vision. The eyebright is a small low herb of the meadow, with little white and purple flowers each marked, if you look close, with a small spot of gold like a tiny eye. And the old herbalists, seeing this, were sure by their doctrine of signatures that a herb so marked must surely be a healer of the eye, and they used it for every weakness and dimness of the sight, so that its very name in many tongues means the eye gladdener. The fennel too, that warm feathery herb of the garden, was held a great brightener of the eyes. For the old tale said that the serpent rubbed its dimming eyes against the fennel in the spring to clear its sight. To make the water, you take the eyebright and the fennel, and make of them a clear, soft infusion, strained very carefully clean, and with this the eyes were bathed, and a little of it was sometimes taken inwardly as well. Whether it could truly mend a failing sight we may well doubt, but the cool, clear washing soothed and refreshed the tired and the strained eye, and the gentle herbs did it no harm. And the hope of the brightening was itself a comfort, and the eyebright is gathered and used for the tired eyes to this very day, the small gold-eyed flower of the meadow that the old masters trusted, by the shape of its little flower, to be a friend to the failing eye. The 68th recipe is a soothing eye salve of rose and tutty, given for the red and sore and inflamed eye, the eye grown hot and swollen and weeping, and the tutty was the heart of it, that being the old name for a fine impure powder of zinc that gathered in the flues of the furnaces where the metal was worked, and that the old physicians prized greatly for the healing of the sore eye. To make the salve, you take the tutty, ground to the very finest and smoothest powder, for nothing rough might touch the tender eye, and you work it up with rose water and a little soothing oil or honey into a soft, smooth salve, and a very little of this was laid with the greatest care along the edge of the inflamed lid. The fine soothing zinc dried and healed the weeping and inflamed eye, and the cool rose soothed the heat and the soreness, and there is a true virtue in it that the modern science wholly grants, for the fine zinc is still used in the salves and the lotions for the sore and weeping skin, and the inflamed eye to this very day, a soothing and a drying and a healing thing. So that here once more the old masters, choosing their fine furnace powder for the red sore eye, had laid their careful hands upon a thing that truly served, and that serves still, 800 years and more from the lamplit rooms, where first they ground it small. The 69th recipe is a sharp, bright remedy of celandine and honey, given for the web or the film or the cloud that might grow upon the eye and dim the sight, and the celandine was the heart of it, a low herb of the wall and the wayside with small bright yellow flowers, and a curious orange juice that wells from its broken stem. The old herbalists, seeing that bright orange juice, were sure it must be a powerful thing for the eye, and there was an old tale besides that the swallow used the celandine to restore the sight of its blind young in the nest, so that the very name of the herb comes from the Greek word for the swallow. To make the remedy, the celandine juice, which is sharp and even fierce, was greatly tempered and softened with much clear honey and rosewater, into a mild golden wash, and a very little of this was used with the most careful hand to clear the dimness from the eye. We should be wary of it now, for the raw juice is far too sharp for so tender a part, and yet the old masters knew to soften it well, and the honey itself soothed and healed, and the recipe shows us, once again, the old doctrine of signatures at its work, the bright juice and the swallow's tail leading the healer to the herb, half by true watching and half by hopeful fancy. As so much of the old healing was, the wisdom and the wishing woven close together in the one bright golden drop. The 70th recipe is the gentlest of all the eye remedies, a simple clear wash of pure rose water for the tired and the strained eye, the eye worn weary with the long close work of the day. And it is hardly a medicine at all, only the cool clean sweetness of the rose given to the tired eye for its rest and its refreshing. We have met the cool soothing virtue of the rose so many times now, in the stomach and the fever and the wound and the troubled head, and here it is given in its very simplest form, the clear distilled water of the rose, cool and fragrant and pure. To make it, you take a great quantity of fresh rose petals and steep them, and gently draw off their fragrant essence into clear water, or you take the rose water already made. And with this cool, clear, sweet water the tired eyes were bathed at the close of the day, or soft cloths were dipped in it and laid cool upon the closed and aching lids. The cool rose water soothed away the burning and the dryness and the weariness of the strained eye, and refreshed it and eased it, and the soft, sweet scent of it calmed and quieted the whole tired head. And there is no purer or no gentler comfort in all our 100 recipes than this, the cool, sweet rosewater bathed softly upon the weary eyes in the quiet of the evening. The long days looking washed gently away, the tired eyes cooled and soothed and made ready, like the rest of the tired body, for the kindly dark of sleep. The 71st recipe is a cleansing eye wash of aloe and myrrh, given for the rheumy and the gummed and the matted eye, the eye that wept a thick and sticky matter and gummed its lashes shut in the morning, and it joined 2 of the great bitter cleansing drugs of the East. The aloe is the bitter, dried juice of a fleshy, leafed plant of the hot lands, and the myrrh is the bitter, fragrant gum of a desert tree, the same that was brought to the child in the old story, and both were held great cleansers and healers, sharp and bitter and drying. To make the wash, the aloe and the myrrh were dissolved and much diluted and softened in rosewater into a mild bitter wash, strained very clean, and with this used most gently. The gummed and rheumy eye was cleansed of its thick matter, and the inflamed lid was soothed and dried. The bitter drugs cleansed and dried the weeping eye, and the rose soothed the soreness, and the recipe shows the masters of Salerno, using the precious bitter gums of the Eastern trade, brought all the long way along the spice roads, for the humble and the common trouble of the gummed and matted eye, the costly drugs of the desert serving the small daily ills of the southern town. There is a fine sense in it still, for the bitter cleansing things did indeed dry and cleanse the weeping eye, and a careful, gentle, well-softened use of them did a true and noticeable good. The 72nd recipe turns from the eye to the tooth, and it is a soothing gargle of sage and salt for the loose and the aching tooth, and the sore and the spungy gum, and it is the simplest and the most useful of all the old remedies of the mouth. The sage, that grey-green herb of long life and of 100 virtues that we have met so often, was held among its many gifts a great strengthener and healer of the gum and the loose tooth, and the salt is a cleanser and a firmer of the soft and bleeding flesh of the mouth, and the two together in a warm gargle were one of the surest comforts for the troubled mouth. To make it, you take the fresh or dried sage and steep it in hot water to make a strong green infusion, and into the warm water you stir a good pinch of salt, and with this warm salt sage water the mouth was rinsed and gargled warm several times in the day. The warm salt water cleansed and firmed the soft sore gum and drew out the soreness, and the sage soothed and healed and strengthened, and the loose tooth was firmed, and the aching gum was eased, and the foul and bleeding mouth was cleansed and sweetened. It is a remedy so sound and so simple that it is given still by the wisest of the modern tooth doctors, the warm salt water rinse for the sore and bleeding gum, sometimes with the very same sage, and it is among the truest and the most lasting of all the recipes of Salerno. The warm green salted water swilled gently about the aching mouth, the oldest and one of the best of all the comforts of the troubled tooth. The 73rd recipe is a sharp and a curious remedy for the toothache, the chewing of the root of the pellitory, a herb whose root, when it is chewed, brings on a strange tingling and burning numbness upon the tongue and the mouth, and a great flowing of the spittle, and that the old physicians used to draw the rheum from an aching tooth and to dull a little its raging pain. The pellitory of the old medicine, the pellitory of Spain, is a small daisy-like herb whose root holds a fierce and tingling principle, and the chewing of a small piece of it sets the whole mouth tingling and burning and watering in the most remarkable way. To use it, the sufferer from the toothache would take a small piece of the dried root and chew it slowly upon the side of the aching tooth, and the strange tingling numbness it brought on would dull, for a while, the worse pain of the tooth, and the great flow of the spittle it caused was held to draw away the rheum and the humour that fed the ache. There is a true small virtue in it, for the root does indeed hold a thing that numbs and tingles the flesh it touches, a faint and natural kin to the numbing medicines the modern tooth doctor uses, and the old sufferer, chewing his strange burning root upon his aching tooth in the long night, was reaching, by the rough means of his age, for the very thing we still most wish, for in that pain, a little numbing of the merciless ache, a little dulling of the cruel, small fire in the jaw. The 74th recipe is one of the strangest in all our 100, a fumigation of henbane seed for the toothache, born of one of the oddest of all the old beliefs about the body. The belief that the toothache was caused by a small worm that gnawed within the tooth, and that the smoke of the henbane seed could drive it out. To use it, the sufferer would cast a little of the seed of the henbane upon some glowing embers, and hold the aching mouth open in the rising smoke, breathing it in about the aching tooth, and as the seed burned and crackled it, threw off small white threads and motes in the smoke, and these the old healers took to be the very worms, driven out and dying, the cause of the ache made visible at last. We know now there was never any worm at all, and that the small white threads were nothing but the seed cases bursting in the heat. And yet there is a true small mercy hidden even in this strangest of recipes, for the henbane, as we have seen, holds a powerful drowsy numbing poison, and the breathing of its smoke about the aching tooth would indeed have dulled the pain and brought a numbing drowsiness, so that the sufferer, watching the little white threads rise in the smoke, and believing his worm was driven out, would have felt his pain grow truly less, half by the numbing virtue of the smoke, and half by the deep relief of the hope, and would have gone to his rest believing himself cured, and have slept the better for it, in the warm numbing smoke of the burning seed. The 75th recipe is a fine tooth powder of cuttlefish bone and pumice, to clean and to whiten and to polish the teeth, and it shows the care the masters of Salerno took even for the look and the brightness of the teeth, and not their health alone. The cuttlefish bone is the light white inner shell of the cuttlefish of the sea, soft and chalky, and easily ground to a fine smooth powder, and the pumice is the light grey frothy stone cast up from the fires of the earth, of which there was great plenty in that land of old volcanoes near the burning mountain, and both, finely ground, make a fine gentle scoring powder. To make the tooth powder, you take the cuttlefish bone and a very little of the finest ground pumice, and grind them together to a smooth fine dust, perhaps with a little dried mint or a little salt, and with this powder, rubbed upon the teeth with a soft cloth or a frayed green twig, the teeth were scoured gently clean and bright. The fine soft powder polished away the stains and the films from the teeth, and left them clean and white and smooth, and the gentle scoring firmed the gum besides. And there is a near and a homely familiarity in it, for the fine chalky powder rubbed upon the teeth to clean and whiten them is the very thing, in its plainest essence, that fills the tubes of tooth powder and toothpaste upon every bathroom shelf to this very day, the same old simple wisdom of the fine soft scoring dust used in the lamplit rooms of Salerno 800 years ago. The 76 recipe is a small sharp comfort for the hollow and the aching tooth. A drop of the oil of cloves and mastic let fall into the very cavity of the decayed tooth to deaden its pain. And the clove was the heart of it. That warm, dark, fragrant flower, bud of a tree of the far eastern islands, brought all the long way to the south along the spice roads, and prized for its strong, warm, numbing virtue upon the aching flesh. To make the remedy, the warm oil was drawn from the cloves, and mingled perhaps with a little of the fragrant mastic gum, and a very little of this warm, fragrant oil was let fall upon a small twist of wool, and pressed gently into the hollow of the aching tooth, where it lay against the raw and tender heart of the tooth, and slowly deadened its pain. There is a deep and a lasting truth in this recipe, perhaps the truest of all our remedies of the tooth, for the oil of cloves does indeed hold a powerful thing that numbs and soothes the raw and aching nerve of the tooth, and it is used to this very day. The oil of cloves dropped into the aching tooth by the modern tooth doctor, and in the modern home alike, almost wholly unchanged from the way the masters of Salerno used it. The same warm, dark, fragrant oil, the same blessed deadening of the cruel small pain. One of the very few of all our 100 recipes that the long centuries of science have left so nearly exactly as they found it, because the old masters had already, so long ago, found it right. The 77th recipe is a soothing gargle of mallow and barley for the swollen gum and the sore and inflamed throat, given to ease the rawness and the swelling, and the pain of a throat or a mouth grown hot and sore, and it joins the soft slippery mallow and the gentle barley that we have met so often in their soothing work. To make it, you take the soft mallow leaves and roots that give up their slippery soothing slime, and a handful of barley, and simmer them gently together in water into a soft, thick, slippery, soothing decoction. And with this warm, soft liquor, the sore throat was gargled and the swollen gum was bathed. The soft, slippery mallow coated and soothed the raw and inflamed flesh of the throat and the gum, easing the rawness and the soreness as a soft balm laid over a smarting hurt. And the gentle barley added its own soft, soothing nourishment. And the whole warm, slippery gargle was a great and immediate comfort to a throat grown raw and painful, and a gum grown hot and swollen. There is no surer ease for a sore throat, even now, than something warm and soft and soothing swallowed slow, and the soft mallow gargle of Salerno was exactly that. The warm, soothing, slippery liquor laid gently over the raw and burning throat, the oldest kind of comfort for one of the commonest of all the small miseries of the body. The 78th recipe is a sharp astringent mouthwash of vinegar and rose, used to firm and to fasten the loosening teeth, and to cleanse and to sweeten the whole mouth, and it joins the cleansing soreness of the vinegar with the gentle binding sweetness of the rose. To make it, you take good wine vinegar, and into it you steep the dried red rose petals for many days until the vinegar has drawn out the binding virtue and the soft scent of the rose and has turned a pale pink, and then you strain it and dilute it well with water, and with this sharp, fragrant pink wash the mouth was rinsed. The sharp sourness of the vinegar cleansed the mouth, and was held to firm, and to fasten the loosening tooth, and to harden the soft and spongy gum. And the rose softened its harshness, and lent it a gentle binding sweetness, and a soft scent, and the mouth so rinsed was left clean and fresh and firm. The astringent binding nature of it had a true small use, for a mild astringent does indeed firm the soft and bleeding gum. And the recipe is the old kin of the firming. Astringent mouthwash is still sold for the same purpose to this very day. The sharp clean rinse for the soft and bleeding gum, made gentle and fragrant, in the old Salerno way, with the soft sweet rose. The 79th recipe is the last of our remedies for the eyes and the teeth, and it is a gentle wash of plantain water for the bleeding gum, the soft green plantain that we met among the healers of wounds. Here turn to the soothing and the staunching of the small, sore, bleeding flesh of the mouth. The plantain, that low broad-leafed weed of every path, was held a great staunch of bleeding, and a great healer of the sore and broken flesh, and its cool green water was a gentle and a soothing thing for the troubled mouth. To make it, you take the fresh green leaves of the plantain, and bruise them and steep them, or simmer them gently in water, and strain off the cool green water, and with this the bleeding and the spongy gum was rinsed and bathed, warm or cool, several times in the day. The plantain water soothed the sore inflamed gum, and helped to staunch its bleeding and to firm, and to heal the soft broken flesh, gently and kindly, and without any harshness. And there is a fitting quietness in ending the remedies of the mouth with this commonest and humblest of all the herbs, the plantain that springs up between the very stones of the path, gathered and steeped and turned by the careful old art of Salerno into a soft green healing for the small sore bleeding troubles of the mouth. Now let us go on gently, for the night is deep now, and there is not so very far to go. And let us turn now to the recipes the masters of Salerno made for the joints, for the stiff and the swollen and the aching limbs that came so often to the old, and to those worn by hard work and cold and damp, in an age that had so little to ease the slow griefs of the aging body. For the stiffened joint and the aching back and the swollen gouty foot were among the commonest of all the troubles brought to the master's door, and he had gathered, over his long years, a great store of warming liniments and soothing baths, and drawing plasters to ease them. Let us turn now, then, to the liniments and the baths for the stiffened joints. The 80th recipe is a warm, soft fomentation of chamomile and dill and mallow, laid upon the stiff and the aching joint to ease it and to loosen it, and it joins 3 of the gentlest and the most soothing of all the old herbs in the simple healing warmth of the hot, moist cloth. We have met all 3 before: the soft apple-sweet chamomile, the warm, comforting dill, and the slippery, soothing mallow, and here they are brought together for the easing of the joint. To make the fomentation, you take a good quantity of all 3 herbs and steep them in much hot water to make a strong, fragrant infusion, and then you dip soft folded cloths into the hot herb water and wring them out and lay them, as warm as can be borne, upon the stiff and aching joint, and cover them to hold the warmth and renew them as they cool. The simple healing warmth of the hot cloth eased the stiffness and the deep ache of the joint, and the gentle herbs soothed and softened, and the whole warm, fragrant fomentation, laid on slowly and renewed again and again, brought a deep and a spreading ease to the cold, stiff, painful limb. There is no surer comfort for a stiff and aching joint even now than the simple warmth laid gently upon it, the hot cloth, the warm bath, the gentle heat that loosens what the cold has bound. And the masters of Salerno knew it well, and gave it freely. The warm, fragrant cloths laid, one after another upon the aching limb in the lamplight, the slow spreading warmth, the slow loosening of the long achy. The 81st recipe is a hotter and a sharper remedy, the mustard plaster that the old physicians called the synopism, laid upon the cold dead and the deeply aching limb to draw the warmth and the blood back into it, and it is one of the most powerful of all the old ways of warming a cold and sluggish part. The mustard seed, ground to a flour and wetted, gives off a fierce warming pungency that bites and burns upon the skin and draws the blood up red and hot to the surface. And the old masters used this fierce warming power to rouse a limb grown cold and dead and sluggish, and to draw the deep-seated ache and humour up and out toward the skin. To make the plaster, you take the ground mustard seed and mix it with a little flour to temper its fierceness, and wet it with warm water into a paste, and spread it upon a cloth, and lay it upon the cold aching part, but only for a short while, and watching it close, for left too long the fierce mustard will blister and burn the skin. The fierce warmth of it drew the blood up hot and red into the cold sluggish limb, and roused it, and the deep ache was drawn up and eased, and the cold dead part was warmed and quickened. It is a remedy used far down into recent time, the mustard plaster laid upon the cold aching chest or the stiff cold limb, and many an older person living yet remembers it from their own childhood, the fierce warm bite of the mustard, the deep warmth drawn up into the aching part, one of the longest lived and the most vivid of all the old warming remedies. The 82nd recipe is a curious old liniment, the oil of earthworms compounded with St. John's wort, rubbed upon the strained and the aching sinew and the stiff cold joint to warm it and to ease it. And strange as it sounds to the modern ear, it was a trusted remedy of the old books, and not the least esteemed of all the warming oils. To make it, the old apothecaries would take the common earthworms, washed clean, and steep them with the red flowered St. John's wort in warm oil gently and long, until the oil had drawn out from them a warming and a soothing virtue. And then they strained it clear and kept it for the rubbing of the aching limb. We need not flinch too much at the earthworm in it, for the old healing reached often to such things, and the true virtue of the liniment lay as much in the warming St. John's wort and in the simple act of the slow warm rubbing as in any power of the worm. For the rubbing itself, the slow firm kneading of the warm oil into the stiff cold aching joint, is a true and a real comfort, easing the stiffness and bringing the warmth and the blood up into the part. And the red St. John's wort oil, as we have seen, holds a true soothing virtue for the aching nerve and sinew, so that the limb so anointed and so rubbed was truly eased. Whatever we may think now of the worms that went into the oil, the 83rd recipe is a fierce old country remedy for the gouty and the palsied foot, the whipping of the cold, dead, aching limb with the fresh, stinging nettle, that the old physicians called by its grand name, urtication, from the Latin for the nettle. It seems a cruel remedy, to beat an aching limb with the stinging nettle, and yet there was a true logic in it, for the sting of the nettle brings a fierce heat, and a fierce flow of the blood up into the skin it touches. And this fierce drawing of the hot blood up into the cold, dead, sluggish part was held to rouse it and to warm it, and to draw out the deep, cold ache. To use it, the sufferer, or the healer, would take a fresh bunch of the stinging nettle and lash it gently, but firmly against the cold, gouty foot, or the palsied limb, until the skin flushed hot and red, and tingling with the sting, and the deep cold part was roused and warmed, and the slow blood drawn up into it. There is a true small virtue in it, strange as it seems. For the fierce flush the nettle brings does indeed warm and rouse a cold, sluggish part, and some have found, even in recent times, a real if rough relief from the aching joint in the old nettle sting. So that this fiercest seeming of all our remedies for the joints was not the mere folly it might appear, but a rough and ready warming of the cold dead limb, drawn up hot and red by the fierce green fire of the common nettle. The 84th recipe is a soft warm poultice of cabbage leaf and bran, laid upon the hot swollen and inflamed joint to draw out the heat and the swelling, and to ease the throbbing pain, and it is among the gentlest and the homeliest of all the old remedies for the troubled joint. The cabbage, that humblest of all the garden plants, was held by the old healers a great draw out of heat and humour, its broad cool leaves laid upon a hot swollen part to draw and to cool it, and the bran, the rough outer husk of the grain, made a soft warm drawing poultice when it was wetted and warmed. To make the remedy, you take the broad green leaves of the cabbage and bruise their thick ribs, that they may give up their cooling juice, and warm them, and lay them upon the hot swollen joint, and over them a soft warm poultice of bran wetted with hot water or vinegar, and bind them gently in place. The cool bruised cabbage drew out the heat and the swelling, and the warm soft bran soothed and drew, and the throbbing inflamed joint was cooled and eased. It is a remedy still used in many an old country place. The bruised cabbage leaf bound upon the hot swollen joint, and some swear by it yet, and whatever the truth of its drawing power, it cools and soothes and comforts the hot painful part, and there is a fitting humbleness in it. The commonest leaf of the kitchen garden bound upon the aching joint, the plain green wisdom of the poor, written down with all the rest in the great book of the Master of Salerno. The 85th recipe is the simplest and the most comforting of all the remedies for the aching back, the warm bag of bran and salt, heated by the fire and laid upon the cold, stiff, aching back to ease it with its slow, dry warmth. And it is hardly a recipe at all, only the old, deep wisdom of the dry warmth laid upon the aching part. To make it, you take a small bag of strong cloth, and fill it with bran, or with bran and coarse salt mingled, and you heat it slow and thorough by the fire, or upon a warm stone, until it holds a deep and a lasting dry heat, and then you lay it, as warm as can be borne, upon the cold, stiff, aching back, and the slow, dry warmth of it soaks deep into the aching muscle and eases the stiffness and the pain. The salt was held to hold and to give back the heat the longer and the deeper, and the dry warmth of the bag, unlike the wet warmth of the fomentation, could be kept long against the back without wetting the bed or the clothes, and it eased the deep achy of the cold, stiff back as nothing else so simply could. It is the direct ancestor of the warm wheat bag and the hot water bottle of the present day, the same old comfort of the dry warmth laid upon the aching part, and there could be no homelier or no kinder thing to ease a tired aching back at the close of a long hard day than that warm bag of bran and salt, heated slow by the fire and laid gently down, the slow deep warmth easing the long ache away. The 86th recipe is a warming liniment of rue and bay and rosemary, rubbed upon the cold stiff joint to warm it and to ease its stiffness, and it joins 3 of the warm aromatic herbs in a fragrant oil for the rubbing of the aching limb. The rue, that bitter blue-green herb of grace, the bay, the dark glossy leaf of the laurel, and the rosemary, the fragrant evergreen of memory, were all held warm and quickening herbs, apt to warm a cold and sluggish part and to rouse the slow blood, and their warm aromatic oils made a fine fragrant liniment. To make it, you take the leaves of all 3 herbs and steep them in warm oil, gently and long, until the oil has drawn out their warmth and their fragrance, and then you strain it and keep it for the rubbing of the joint. The warm fragrant oil was rubbed slow and firm into the cold stiff aching joint, and the warmth of the herbs and the firm slow rubbing together eased the stiffness and brought the warmth and the blood up into the cold part, and the clean sharp fragrance of the rue and the bay and the rosemary, rising warm from the rubbed limb, was itself a brisk and a reviving thing. There is a true comfort in it that needs little theory. The slow firm rubbing of the warm fragrant oil into the cold stiff joint, the warmth drawn up into the aching part, the clean sharp herb scent rising in the lamplight, the slow easing of the long stiffness under the careful kneading hands. The 87th recipe is not made in the dispensary at all, but found in the very ground, the warm sulphur springs and steaming baths of that volcanic land, in which the old physicians bade the sufferers from the riham and the stiff joint to bathe. For that warm corner of Italy was rich in the hot springs, and the steaming waters that welled up warm and reeking of sulphur from the fires deep beneath the earth, near the old burning fields the Romans had called the Phlegraean Fields, and the famous baths of Pozzuoli and Baiae near Naples. To use them, the sufferer from the aching rheumatic joint, the stiff and swollen limb, the old grief of the bones, would go to the warm springs and bathe long in the hot mineral water, or sit in the steaming vapour of the natural hot caves, day after day, that the deep penetrating warmth and the strange virtue of the sulphurous waters might soak into the aching joints and ease them. The old physicians wrote whole books upon the virtues of these baths, each spring for its own kind of ailment, and great folk and humble came from far to bathe in them. And there is a true and lasting good in it, for the warm mineral bathing does indeed ease the stiff rheumatic joint, and people go to the very same warm springs of that same warm coast to bathe their aching limbs to this very day, the warmth of the deep earth itself rising up, as it has risen for thousands of years, to ease the slow griefs of the aging body. The 88th recipe is a careful and a dangerous remedy for the gout, the giving of the autumn crocus, that the old physicians called colchicum, the surest of all the old medicines against the cruel pain of the gout, and the most perilous, to be used only by the most knowing hand. The autumn crocus is a lovely pale flower that springs up bare and leafless from the meadow in the autumn, and it holds in its root and seed a powerful poison, deadly in any but the smallest measure, and yet that same poison, given in the most careful and the smallest dose, does truly and remarkably ease the dreadful pain of the gout, that swelling and burning torment of the joint. above all of the great tow that came so often to those who ate richly and drank deep. To use it, the old physicians, who had it from the Arab and the Greek physicians before them, gave the very smallest measure of the colchicum to the sufferer in the height of the gouty attack, and watched him close, for the line between the easing dose and the poisoning dose was a narrow and a fearful one. We use it still to this very day, the medicine drawn from that same autumn crocus, given still for the very same gout, in a small and a careful measured dose, one of the oldest of all the medicines that the modern science still keeps in its cupboard, almost exactly as the ancients used it, the pale autumn flower that holds at once the poison and the cure, the danger and the blessed easing of the cruel pain. The 89th recipe is the last of our remedies for the joints, and it is a drawing plaster of wax and wormwood and vinegar, laid upon the swelling and the bruise, and the wrenched joint to draw out the swelling and to ease the pain, and it joins the bitter, cooling wormwood and the sharp, drawing vinegar in a soft, clinging plaster. To make it, you take the bitter wormwood, ground small, and good vinegar, and melt them up with wax and a little oil into a soft green clinging plaster, and spread it upon a cloth, and lay it upon the swollen, bruised or wrenched joint, and bind it gently in place, and renew it as needed. The cooling bitter wormwood and the sharp vinegar were held to draw out the swelling and the bruised blood, and to cool the heat, and to ease the ache of the wrenched and the bruised joint, and the soft wax held it close and warm against the part. It is the old kin of the cooling drawing plasters, and the bruised salves still rubbed upon the wrenched and bruised limb to this very day. And there is a fitting close in ending the remedies of the joints with this homely plaster, the bitter herb and the sharp vinegar, and the soft wax, bound gently upon the swollen aching part, the careful old art of Salerno bent, to the very last, upon the slow patient easing of the aches, and the swellings, and the small daily griefs of the body. Now let us go on gently, for we come now to the last of all our 100 recipes, the cordials and the confections the masters of Salerno made for the heart and for the failing spirits, the medicines they reached for when the trouble lay not in the stomach or the joint or the skin, but deeper in the very heart and the very spirit of the sufferer, in the faintness and the trembling and the great sinking of the soul. For the old masters believed that the heart was the seat of the life and the spirit both, and that a heart grown weak or sad or frightened needed its own particular medicines. The warm aromatic confections and the bright cordials that they held could comfort and strengthen and gladden the very heart itself. Let us turn now, then, to the cordials for the heart and for the failing spirits, and as we walk among these last gentle recipes, let your own heart grow quiet and easy, for the long walk is nearly done. The 90th recipe is a warm aromatic confection for the heart that the old masters called diambra, made of musk and ambergris and the warm sweet spices, given to comfort and to strengthen a heart grown weak and faint and trembling. The musk and the ambergris are two of the costliest and the most powerful of all the old perfumes, one from the deer of the far mountains and from the deep sea, and they were held, beyond their great use as scents, to be of all things the most cordial, the most strengthening and gladdening to the very heart, and they were joined in this confection with the warm sweet spices, the cinnamon and the clove and the nutmeg, and worked up with sugar into a fragrant, aromatic paste. A very little of this costly confection was given to the one whose heart was weak and faint, whose spirits had sunk low, who trembled and grew faint, and felt the very life ebbing within them. And the warm, powerful fragrance and the warm, sweet spices were held to reach the very heart, and to comfort it, and to strengthen it, and to lift the sinking spirit. It was among the most precious of all the Master's medicines, kept in a small lidded box, and given by the smallest measure. And there is a strange beauty in the thought of it. The rarest perfumes of the mountains and the sea, the costliest sweetness in all the world, gathered and worked into a small fragrant paste, and given, by the careful grain, to comfort and to strengthen a frightened and a failing human heart. The 91st recipe is a bright, cordial syrup of borage and rose, given to comfort the heart and to lift the sinking spirit, and it joins two of the great gladdening flowers of the old healing. The blue-starred borage that we met among the medicines of sleep, that brings always courage, and the cool, sweet rose that comforts every part it touches. To make the syrup, you take the blue flowers and the leaves of the borage and the red petals of the rose, and you steep them to draw out their color and their gladdening virtue, and boil it gently with sugar into a bright and fragrant cordial syrup, and a spoonful of this in a little wine or water was given to comfort and to gladden a heart grown heavy and faint. The borage was held the very chief of all the herbs, to drive away sadness, and to lift the heavy heart, and to put courage and gladness into the sinking spirit. And the rose comforted, and cooled and calmed, and the bright sweet cordial together was a true and a gentle comfort to one weighed down in heart and spirit. There is a soft hopefulness in the very color of it. The bright blue and red of the borage and the rose boiled into a glowing cordial syrup, a little brightness bottled and kept against the grey and heavy days. The gladness of the summer garden given by the spoonful to lift, a little, the sad and frightened heart toward the light. The 92nd recipe is one of the strangest and the most costly of all. The electuary gilded with leaves of true gold, given to one sunk in a great languor and weakness of the heart and the spirit, for the old physicians held the gold itself to be a great cordial, a thing of the sun and of the most precious of all metals, that could not rust or tarnish or decay, and that they believed could lend something of its own incorruptible strength to the failing heart. To make it, the apothecary would take a strengthening aromatic electuary of the warm cordial herbs and spices, and upon its surface, or worked gently through it, he would lay the thinnest leaves of beaten gold, so fine that a breath would lift them, until the dark, fragrant paste glittered and shone with the precious metal. A little of this gilded electuary was given to one in a deep languor and faintness of heart, and the gold, the old masters believed, lent its own bright strength to the sinking spirit. We know now that the gold, being so unchanging that the body cannot take it up or use it at all, can do nothing of itself. And yet there is a melancholy splendor in the thought of it still, the dying languor met with leaves of beaten gold, the most precious and the most enduring of all things, laid upon the tongue of the failing. A last bright costly hope against the long sinking of the heart, and the small gleam of gold in the lamplight, as the spoon was lifted, beautiful and useless and brave. The 93rd recipe is a cordial of saffron, given to the fainting and the swooning heart, for the saffron, that costly golden thread that we met among the medicines of sleep and of melancholy, was held above almost all things a great cordial and a great gladdener of the heart, a thing to rouse the swooning and to lift the sinking and to put a golden warmth back into the failing spirit. To make the cordial, you take a few threads of the precious saffron and steep them in warm wine until the wine has drawn out their deep golden color and their warm gladdening virtue, and has turned a rich and glowing gold. And a little of this golden cordial wine was given to the one whose heart grew faint, whose color failed, who sank toward a swoon, and the warm golden draught was held to rouse and to gladden and to strengthen the fainting heart. There is a true small virtue in it, for the saffron does indeed hold things that lift the heavy spirit, and the warm wine itself would rouse and comfort the faint, and the deep golden color of the cordial, and the great rarity and costliness of the saffron, would themselves have lent the sufferer a sense of being most preciously tended, which is itself, to a frightened and a failing heart, no small medicine. The warm gold cordial held to the pale lips in the lamplight, the small precious warmth spreading through the sinking body, the golden thread of the autumn flower set, once again, against the cold and the dark. The 94th recipe is a sweet conserve of the flowers of rosemary, given to gladden and to strengthen the heart, and to lift the heavy and the failing spirit. And the rosemary, that dark fragrant evergreen of memory and of remembrance that we have met before, was held among its many virtues a great comforter of the heart and a great lifter of the sad and sluggish spirit. To make the conserve, you take the small pale blue flowers of the rosemary, gathered in their season, and you pound them fine with sugar into a soft fragrant conserve, sweet and resinous and faintly blue. And a small spoonful of this was given to comfort and to gladden a heavy heart, and to clear and to lift a dull and a sinking spirit. The clean, sharp fragrance of the rosemary was held to wake and to brighten the dulled and the heavy mind, and to strengthen the faint heart, and to drive away the sad and the sluggish humor. And there is a true freshness in it, for the bright clean scent of the rosemary does indeed seem to wake and to lift the heavy spirit, as anyone knows who has brushed against the fragrant bush in the warm sun and felt the small lift of the heart at its clean sharp smell. The sweet blue rosemary conserve given against the heavy spirit was a small fragrant gladness kept against the grey days, the clean bright scent of the evergreen bottled in sugar, the herb of remembrance set gently against the sinking of the heart. The 95th recipe is a cordial wine of balm and bugloss, given for the heavy and the grieving heart, and it joins the lemon-scented balm that gladdens the spirit, the melissa that we met among the medicines of sleep, with the blue-starred bugloss, cousin to the borage, that lifts and cheers the sinking heart. To make it, you take the green leaves of the balm and the blue flowers and leaves of the bugloss, and you steep them in good wine, sweetened a little with honey, until the wine has drawn out their gladdening virtue and their soft fragrance. And a cup of this cordial wine was given warm to one whose heart was heavy with grief or sunk low in sadness. The clean lemony balm was held the very chief of all the herbs to drive away dark thoughts, and to make the heart merry and glad, and the bugloss to lift, and to cheer the sinking spirit, and the warm sweet wine to comfort the whole body. And the three together made a gentle and a true comfort for the grieving heart. There is a deep kindness in it, that for the heart bowed down, with sorrow the old masters reached not for some bitter draught, but for a warm and a fragrant and a gladdening cup, a thing of clean lemon scent and blue summer flowers and warm sweet wine, given gently to one in grief to lift the heavy heart, a little, just a little, toward the light, and to let it lay its sorrow down a while and rest. The 96th recipe is the aromatic pomander worn upon the breast against the faintness of the heart. Kin to the pomander, we met among the fever medicines, but worn here not against the corrupt air of the plague, but against the sinking and the swooning of a weak and a fearful heart. The old masters held that the warm, sweet fragrances reached and comforted the very heart, and that one of a faint and a trembling and an anxious heart might be much eased by the constant breathing in of a powerful cordial scent, worn always near. To make it, you take the most cordial and the most strengthening of the sweet things, the musk and the ambergris, the rose and the warm spices and the fragrant gums, and work them into a small fragrant bowl, and set it in a little pierced case of silver or of gold, and hang it upon a chain to lie against the breast, near the heart, where its warmth would draw out the scent. The wearer, faint or anxious or trembling of heart, would breathe its warm, sweet fragrance always, and lift it often to the nose in a moment of faintness, and the powerful cordial scent was held to reach and to comfort and to strengthen the very heart. There is a gentleness in it that we can feel even now, for a sweet and a familiar and a comforting scent does truly soothe an anxious and a fearful spirit, as anyone knows who has been calmed by a remembered fragrance, and the small fragrant ball worn always near the heart, breathed in slowly in the moment of fear, was a true and a tender comfort. The warm, sweet scent set softly against the cold flutter of the frightened heart. The 97th recipe is a warm, spiced wine to cheer and to warm the heart and the whole body. The spiced wine that the old folk called Hippocrates, after the great physician Hippocrates, for it was held a thing as much of medicine as of pleasure, a cordial and a comfort as well as a delight. To make it, you take good red wine, and into it you put the warm sweet spices, the cinnamon and the clove and the ginger and the grains of paradise, and a good deal of sugar or honey, and you let it steep until the wine has drawn out the warmth and the sweetness and the fragrance of the spices, and then you strain it clear, often through a cloth bag that the old folk called by the quaint name of the sleeve of Hippocrates, and you drink it warm. The warm, spiced, sweet wine cheered and gladdened the heart, and warmed the cold body through, and comforted the sad and the weary spirit, and quickened a slow and a chilly digestion besides. And it was drunk both as a medicine for the faint and the cold and the low of heart, and as a warm delight at the close of a winter feast, the medicine and the pleasure being once again, as so often in the old healing, the very same warm and fragrant cup. There is a deep comfort in the thought of it, the warm spiced wine held in two cold hands on a winter night, the steam of it rising fragrant with cinnamon and clove, the slow sweet warmth spreading through the chilled and weary body, gladdening the heart and easing the spirit, a small warm gladness against the cold and the dark of the year. The 98th recipe is one of the costliest of all, a cordial powder of pearl and coral, given for the trembling and the fluttering heart. For the old physicians held the precious stones and the precious things of the sea to be among the greatest of all the cordials, able to strengthen and to steady the very heart by some virtue of their own rarity and their own incorruptible nature. The pearl, that smooth and lustrous jewel grown within the shell of the oyster in the deep sea, and the red coral, the branching stone grown by the small creatures of the warm Mediterranean waters, were both ground to the finest powder and held among the most precious of the heart medicines. To make the cordial, the pearl and the coral were ground to an impalpable fine white and red dust, and a very little of this precious powder was given in a cordial syrup or wine to one whose heart trembled and fluttered and grew faint, and the precious powders were held to steady and to strengthen and to comfort the failing heart. We know now that the pearl and the coral are little more than lime, the same plain stuff of the chalk and the shell, and can do nothing of any great virtue, and yet the recipe shows us how deeply the old mind trusted the rare and the precious to heal, how it reached for the most fearful trouble of the most vital part, for the very jewels of the sea. And there is a sad and a lovely faith in it, the ground pearl and the ground coral, the treasures of the deep, given by the precious grain to steady a frightened and a trembling human heart. The 99th recipe is the most precious and the most famous of all the old cordials, the great electuary of the precious stones that the old physicians called diamargaritan, the medicine of the pearls, given against the deepest melancholy and the gravest weakness and trembling of the heart. And it was the very king of all the cordial confections, as the theriac was the king of all the antidotes. It was made of a great company of precious and aromatic things, the ground pearl above all, and fragments of the precious stones, and the costly perfumes of the musk and the amber, and the rarest of the warm aromatic spices, all ground small, and worked up with sugar into a precious aromatic powder or paste. A very little of this most costly of all the medicines was given to one sunk in the deepest melancholy, the heaviest sadness of the black bile, or to one whose heart was gravely weak and faint and trembling. And the precious aromatic confection was held to comfort and to strengthen and to gladden the very heart, and to lift the leaden spirit out of its darkness. Most of its precious ingredients, we now know, could do nothing of themselves, the pearl and the stones being but plain lime, and yet the warm aromatic spices in it were true gentle cordials, and the very preciousness of the medicine, the sense of being tended with the rarest things in all the world, was itself a comfort to the sinking spirit. And there is a strange last grandeur in it, this most costly and most precious of all the medicines of Salerno, the ground pearls and the precious stones and the rarest perfumes of the world, gathered together against the oldest and the deepest of all the griefs of the human heart, the great sadness, the great fear, the long sinking of the spirit toward the dark. The 100th recipe, the last of all our 100, is the simplest and the homeliest, and perhaps the wisest of them all, and it is the morning draught of sage and honey and a little wine, the daily health draught of Salerno, taken not against any one sickness, but for the long keeping of the whole body in health, and it carries with it the most famous saying of all that school. For above all the cures of all the sicknesses, the masters of Salerno set the keeping of the health, the living well and wisely and temperately, that should keep the sickness from ever coming at all. And at the heart of their counsel stood the sage, that grey-green herb of long life and of 100 virtues that we have met so many times tonight, woven through our whole 100 recipes from the very first. To make the draught, you take a few fresh green leaves of the sage and steep them in a little warm wine sweetened with honey, and drink it in the quiet of the morning. And it was held to warm and to strengthen the stomach, to clear and to quicken the mind, to comfort the heart and to keep the whole body in its long, slow health. And of this herb above all the great verse rule of health of Salerno asked its most famous question, the question that the masters of the school set, almost in wonder, at the head of all their council. Why should a man die, they asked, who has sage growing in his garden? They knew, of course, that a man must die in the end, sage or no sage, and there is a gentle smile hidden in the old question. And yet beneath the smile there lies the whole quiet wisdom of Salerno, the deep belief that a careful life, a temperate table, a quiet mind, a warm hearth, a garden of healing herbs, and the long, slow daily tending of the body may keep the sickness off and lengthen the good years and ease the road for all of us toward the end, and that the surest medicine of all is not the costly theriac or the ground pearl or the leaf of gold, but the plain green herb in the dooryard garden and the wise and gentle living of the ordinary days. And so we end our 100 recipes where the masters of Salerno would have us end, not with a cure for a sickness, but with a counsel for a life, the warm sweet morning draught of sage and honey, and the old smiling question of the school. Why should a man die who has sage growing in his garden? And there our 100 recipes are ended. Let us come back now, slowly, to the high quiet room above the harbour where we began, on the warm southern evening, with the oil lamp burning low upon the table, and the dried herbs hanging from the dark beams, and the warm sea breeze coming in at the open window. The night is very deep now over Salerno. The last light has long gone from the water, and the sea lies dark and quiet far below the window, breathing softly against the shingle in the dark, in and out, slow and endless and calm. The lamps of the town have gone out one by one along the climbing lanes, and the great bulk of the dark mountains stands black against the stars, and high above them the whole quiet wheel of the summer sky turns slowly over the sleeping town. The same stars under which the masters of Salerno gathered their herbs and weighed their precious powders and wrote their careful recipes so many hundreds of years ago. The old master sits still at his table in the last of the lamplight, his great book of recipes open before him, his careful hands folded quiet upon the page. He has shared with us tonight the gathered wisdom of his whole long life and of his whole great school, the 100 recipes for the stomach and the fever and the wound, for sleep and for the troubles of women, for the eyes and the teeth and the aching joints and the failing heart, the wise and the hopeful, the true and the merely tried, the plain green herb and the ground pearl and the leaf of gold. And now the telling is done, and there is nothing left to do but to bank the lamp and to let the long quiet night come down. You do not need to remember any of the 100 recipes we have spoken tonight, not one of them. Let them go now, gently, all of them, the oxymel and the rose syrup, the barley water and the poppy, the soothing baths of the women of Salerno, and the cool rose water for the tired eyes, the warm bag of bran for the aching back, and the warm spiced wine for the heavy heart. and the last sweet morning draught of sage and honey, and the old smiling question of the school. Let them all drift away from you now, like the last thin smoke rising from the dying lamp, up into the warm dark and away over the quiet sea. They were only ever a thing to drift to sleep upon, a long quiet murmur of old green remedies in the warm dark. And they have done their gentle work, if they have carried you softly down toward the edge of sleep. The old master rises now, slowly, in his careful way, and closes the great book, and smooths his hand once over its worn cover, and sets it aside upon the shelf among the quiet rows of jars. He moves softly about the room in the last of the lamplight, as he has done every night of his long life, setting a jar straight here and a box square there, his slow hands moving among the medicines of his trade, as gently as a shepherd among his flock in the dark. He lifts the small clay lamp from the table and carries it to the window, and stands a moment looking out over the dark and quiet town and the dark and breathing sea, the warm night air soft upon his face, the herbs stirring faintly on their hooks in the gentle breeze. And then he lowers the little flame of the lamp, softly, until it is only a small blue glow upon the dark, and sets it down and turns away, and the high quiet room sinks gently into the warm and fragrant dark, with the herbs hanging still from the beams, and the jars standing quiet in their rows, and the sea breathing softly far below, and the great wheel of the stars turning slowly overhead. There is nothing more tonight that asks anything of you, nothing left to do, and nowhere you need to be, and nothing you need to remember or to hold, but only to lie here, warm and still and quiet, at the close of the long day, and let the warm dark gather you softly in. Let your breath grow slow and even now, slow and even as the soft breathing of the sea against the shingle far below the dark window. In and out, slow and endless and calm. Let the shoulders soften, and the hands grow still, and the whole long day fall away behind you like the dark coast falling away behind a traveller who has come, at last, in over the quiet sea, to a warm room and a low light and a soft and waiting bed. The herbs are hanging in their bunches from the dark beams overhead. The jars stand quiet in their long rows upon the shelf. The lamp is dimmed, and the door is shut, and the warm night is keeping its long slow watch over all of it, and over you. And if you would, before you go, take one slow breath, the slowest and the gentlest of the whole long evening, and as you let it out, let go of everything, all of it, the day behind you and the day to come, and simply rest. There is all the long night before you, and nothing in it now but sleep. Sleep now. From all of us here at the quiet apothecary, by the low lamp and the open window, above the dark and quiet sea, on this warm and peaceful southern night, sleep well and sleep deeply, and let the warm dark carry you gently down into rest. Good night. Good night. Sleep now, and let the little lamp go out, and let the long warm night carry you softly down into sleep.